Chapter 1517. They had been surrounded for a long time. Although Harsenhan had left many things behind when he escaped, there were still hundreds of thousands of civilians with them. Just a day's worth of food and drinks was not a small amount. Seeing their stock dwindle, Tian, who did not say anything, but he was anxious. Now that they had won, they had to gather some good things to strengthen their foundation. The army commander gave the order, and the soldiers below began to get busy. All the soldiers of the 5-star army had excited looks on their faces. They had defeated 100,000 enemy cavalry with only 20,000 men, and they had suffered less than 1,000 casualties. This was definitely a victory that they could brag about to anyone. In contrast, Harbala, who had escaped, looked like he was about to cry. 100,000 men had surrounded 20,000 Han soldiers for more than a month, and they had still been defeated in the end. Now that there were only about 10,000 people who had escaped with him, he could even imagine that once General Mandu La Tu learned of this news, he would most likely be executed according to military law. But he had no choice but to return. If he went back, he would just die. If he did not return, he would implicate his family and die with him. Halbera led his defeated army back to the Timur Empire, his face ashen and deathly pale. The news of their defeat quickly spread across the land. First, there was the rebellion of Ili, who had surrendered to the 5-star army. Next, there was the defeat of the Timur Empire's 100,000 soldiers. This was like adding hail to snow. When the khans and generals of the various khans heard this, it was a heavy blow to their hearts. Many people could not help but wonder if they could still obtain the final victory in this battle. If they did not win, once they were defeated by the 5-star army, what would be waiting for them? Would their entire tribe be wiped out? Since that was the case, why not follow Ili's example and surrender now? At least they could still keep their lives. Right. Someone once said that the 5-star army would not only spare the lives of those who surrendered, but would also leave them with 10% of their wealth. Who knew if this was true? Akmo's city defense battle was not only a defeat, but it also affected the morale of the army, the people, and the will to fight. Once an army lost its morale, it would be difficult for them to win a battle no matter how many soldiers they had. When this news reached the ears of Supreme General Mandu La Tu, he knew what he had to do. Previously, it was to delay the enemy and deplete the enemy's rations so that they could subdue the enemy without fighting. But now, with the 5-star army's main force on the Eastern Front opening up a path, this method was obviously ineffective. Since the situation on the battlefield had changed, Mandarata had to change his tactics accordingly. His choice was to find a division of the 5-star army and engage them in a decisive battle. He wanted to win a few battles first. At the very least, he had to give the other Khaganates some confidence and prove that the 5-star army was not invincible. When Harbala returned to Mandarata's side with 10,000 defeated soldiers, he was not immediately executed. Instead, he was given a chance to redeem himself by leading these 10,000 defeated soldiers to act as the vanguard in the battle against the 5-star army. Not only that, but he was also given the authority to command tens of thousands of soldiers. This kind of conviction moved Harbala to tears. This was also one of Mandarata's brilliance. He could be completely at ease using such a person. At the very least, he would do his best. To be able to survive and have a chance to perform meritorious deeds was already the best outcome. Harbala did not have any complaints about this. He gladly accepted it, and at the same time, he was prepared to either succeed or die trying. Soon, he received a military order and found out that his target was Meng Yisher's Wu Shugu. Speaking of Wu Shugu, he was once the general of the Golden Horde's Golden Horde cavalry. In terms of personal strength, there was no need to mention his strength. Although in the later stages, Yang Qindong redistributed nearly 20,000 Golden Horde cavalry because of necessity, or perhaps because he wanted to weaken Wu Shugu's strength. As a former general, he still received the lion's share. For example, among the 40,000 men in his Meng Yishu's Golden Horde cavalry, there were 8,000 of them. It was precisely because of these 8,000 Golden Horde cavalry that Wu Shugu was full of confidence. When he led the army out, he would go wherever there was danger. He did not put the so-called Khaganate in his eyes at all. After fighting all the way from Eastern Europe, Wu Shugu had a better understanding of the five-star army. He knew the importance of meritorious deeds. He also wanted to perform meritorious deeds for a better future. As such, when the other five-star army could not find the enemy's main force and were waiting and recuperating, he still led Meng Yishu's Golden Horde cavalry to roam around, searching for the main force of the Timur Empire's cavalry. This was also the main reason why Mandu La-Tur had set him as his target. Compared to the other five-star army's Golden Horde cavalry, this Meng Yishu's Golden Horde cavalry was easier to track down. If he could wipe out this cavalry division, the 40,000 five-star army's Golden Horde cavalry would be enough to raise the morale of the entire army and let those who were wavering see hope again. For this plan, Mandu La-Tur had spent a lot of effort. Out of the 180,000 men in his army, he had sent out 120,000 men. With a ratio of 3-to-1 and a familiarity with the terrain, he did not believe that he could not wipe out the five-star army. The Timur Empire's Golden Horde cavalry, hidden in various places, started to become active. However, Yang Qindong did not know about this. First, he was not familiar with the terrain. Although he had sent out many scouts and had a rough understanding of the terrain, there were still too many things that he did not know. It was these places that hid the Timur Empire's Golden Horde cavalry. Second, Yang Xie's development was too fast. The intelligence department was unable to keep up. It was just like when the Japanese coveted me in Greater China. They had spent 10 to 20 years to investigate and understand all kinds of information. They really wanted all kinds of information. Even so, in the later stages of the war, they were unable to obtain any important information. The development of the intelligence department was not something that could be achieved with money. They needed time and accumulation. Because of these objective factors, when Meng Yishu's Golden Horde cavalry once again tried to probe the enemy's main force and was surrounded, Yang Qindong still did not obtain any information. Of course, this was also partly because of Wu Shugu. It was because of his arrogance that he did not immediately report when he discovered a clue causing him to be surrounded. At first, Wu Shugu acted as usual and sent out his troops to search for the enemy's main force. Because this was not the first time he had sent out his troops and had not achieved any results in the past, this time he did not think that it was necessary. At the very least, it could be used to train his troops. Thus, Wu Shugu led out with 40,000 soldiers. When they accidentally discovered a group of 500 Timur Empire's Golden Horde cavalry, he did not immediately report it. Instead, he went with the idea of exterminating the Golden Horde cavalry and gaining some merit. Thinking about it, it made sense. Facing a cavalry of 40,000 men, 500 enemies was simply too few. It was so few that Wu Shugu did not think that it was a great merit. It was only when they chased the Timur Empire's Golden Horde cavalry for 100 li and discovered a second group of 2,000 Timur Empire's Golden Horde cavalry that Wu Shugu became more alert. If they could completely exterminate 2,500 Timur Empire's Golden Horde cavalry, it would not be considered a great merit, but it would still be a merit. Wu Shugu also did not intend to report it. While leading his army in pursuit, he made a wrong decision, and that was to split up his troops. In order to not let the Timur Empire's Golden Horde cavalry escape, Wu Shugu chose to split up his troops and encircle the Timur Empire's Golden Horde cavalry. Chapter 15:18. If one were to say that this was the correct decision, then when Wu Shugu personally led his 8,000 elite golden-armored cavalry into the encirclement of the Timur cavalry, it only took 4 hours for the 2,500 enemy cavalry to be completely wiped out. In the end, not even a single captive was taken, all of them dead. While Wu Shugu was dealing with the central problem, the 120,000 Timur cavalry also launched an attack from the outer perimeter. In order to ensure that they had enough time to eliminate the enemy in the center, Meng Yishur began a defensive battle. In just over 4 hours, more than 6,000 corpses and more than 3,000 injured people were left behind. In just 4 hours, they had lost nearly 10,000 golden-armored cavalry. This made Wu Shugu's heart ache, and he could see the determination of the Timur cavalry. They must have made up their mind to eat up his Meng Yishur. Even though the other side had already made up their minds, Wu Shugu still led his soldiers in a desperate counterattack. With enemies on all sides, every minute and every second seemed to be extremely long. Finally, when the sky turned dark, Meng Yishur was finally able to take a breather by relying on the weather. However, at the same time, they had paid a heavy price. According to the statistics, another 8,000 golden-armored cavalry had died. In less than a day, nearly half of their forces had been killed or injured. This made Wu Shugu realize that tomorrow would be the day of the final battle. He raised his head to look at the moonlight above his head. This might be the last time in his life that he would be able to enjoy the beautiful night. Meng Yishur spent the entire night in despair. The next morning, when the Timur cavalry surrounded them, they began to shout for them to surrender. In general, they said that they were all brothers of the Mongol branch and had a common ancestor. As long as they were willing to put down their weapons and surrender, they would spare their lives, but they would only be slaves. This kind of shouting was destined to be useless. Yang Qindong was a staunch nationalist. Since he dared to use these foreign races, he naturally had his own plans. For example, every foreign race soldier that joined the 5-star army had at least 3 families behind them as guarantors. On the battlefield, if these foreign race soldiers were to surrender or betray them, they would directly implicate those who had guaranteed that they wouldn't betray them. Just based on this point, none of the 20,000 Meng soldiers dared to surrender. Therefore, the persuasion only lasted for less than an hour before it ended in failure. As the general of the death squad, Harbala was furious when he saw that Meng Yi's men were still not surrendering even though they were about to die. Thus, he led his 10,000 men to act as the vanguard. These cavalrymen were all sinners. If they wanted to wash away their sins, they could only prove themselves through bloody battles. This allowed them to have a stronger will than ordinary soldiers. So once they charged, they would be very fierce. Even though Meng Yishur had sent out the same 10,000 cavalrymen, they still couldn't hold on any longer. In the end, it was only when Wu Shugu personally led 5,000 golden-armored cavalrymen into the enemy's ranks that they were able to push them back temporarily. In just one battle, Meng Yishur had lost another 3,000 men. Moreover, the enemy had only sent out 10,000 cavalrymen. If the enemy had sent out their entire army, Meng Yishur would have been wiped out in one battle. Even though the situation was so bad, Wu Shugu didn't show it on his face, other than grumbling in his heart. He constantly comforted the soldiers and told them that with the 5-star army's special treatment, even if they were to die on the battlefield, their families would still be able to receive a considerable amount of compensation. Compared to working for others, it was much more worth it. Next, it was time for them to show their loyalty. It was also time for them to seek the welfare of their living family members. The special treatment made all the soldiers fearless of death. Some of them had even made up their minds to die. In any case, they were going to die anyway. Now that they could die on the battlefield and work for their families, it was worth it. With such a mentality, Meng Yishur was able to display a powerful combat strength. With the golden armored cavalrymen sandwiched between them, they were able to display their superiority as elite cavalrymen. This battle lasted from morning to afternoon, repelling 7 attacks from the Timur cavalry. In the end, Meng Yishur only had 8,000 men left. Of these 8,000 men, the golden armored cavalrymen accounted for half of them. In just one day, 4,000 golden armored cavalrymen had died. This made Wu Shugu's heart ache, but when he thought about how it wouldn't be long before he would also follow these people to the Yellow Springs, his expression became a lot calmer. After attacking for a day and a half, even with 3 times the number of troops, they still couldn't completely wipe out the 40,000 five-star army. This made Harbala very angry. This was his chance to perform. If his performance wasn't perfect, he couldn't guarantee that great General Mandra wouldn't let him off. Therefore, he didn't have any intention to rest. He led the army to launch a new round of attacks, showing an attitude of not giving up until death. There was less than 3 hours before the sky turned completely dark. Harbala wanted to use these 3 hours to completely wipe out the five-star army. He wouldn't allow any more accidents to happen. For this reason, he sent out almost all the cavalrymen who had never been on the battlefield. These people were full of energy and spirit, a total of 35,000 men against 8,000 tired men. No matter how you look at it, they had a lot of advantages. Brothers, the final moment has come. It is also time for us to show our loyalty to Bugnam of Gojoseon. Everyone, follow me. Charge! Wu Shugu's body was covered in blood. Most of it was the enemy's. He also had 2 wounds on his body, but they weren't fatal. Blood covered his face, making him look extremely ferocious as he spoke. Behind him were 4,000 golden-armored cavalrymen. Almost all of them were covered in blood, and some of them were already very weak from the continuous battles. Although they were on the defensive side, they were only on a small hill. If it wasn't for this small terrain advantage, they would have been swallowed up by the enemy long ago. However, for 40,000 cavalrymen, a small hill was not enough. They were able to hold on until now because of their strong will. They believed in the five-star army's powerful intelligence network. The results of this battle would definitely be reported to the wise King Wunan of Daemyeong. If they could kill more enemies, now, their families would be rewarded more after they died. For this matter, everyone put their lives on the line. Under the circumstances where they were outnumbered and the terrain was unfavorable to them, they paid the price of 30,000 men to heavily injure the enemy. This was already a very difficult matter. The 4,000 golden-armored cavalrymen stood on their horses, looking forward. They had already lost count of how many times they had charged, and they had long regarded death as nothing. Perhaps in their hearts, death was a form of relief. Behind the golden-armored cavalrymen were the 4,000 ordinary soldiers. Before this, some of them had never killed anyone before. However, in just over a day, they had experienced almost all the cruelty that could be experienced. Right now, they could proudly tell everyone that they were already veterans who had experienced the cruelest battles. If these people could survive and recuperate for a while, they would become the backbone of the army. However, they knew that living was already a luxury for them. They did not dare to have any hope. Upon hearing Wu Shugu's words, the 8,000-some cavalry raised their sabers and looked at the tens of thousands of enemy cavalry approaching. The panic in their eyes had long since disappeared, replaced by a will to die, an indifference, an attitude that did not matter to death. Wait. Just when the morale of the army was at its lowest, just when the 8,000 men were about to lose all hope, just when they wanted to shed their blood on the battlefield, Suddenly, Commander Wu Gu's words pulled everyone back from the brink of death. Look, what is that? It seems to be our reinforcements. Yes, it's the reinforcements. Look, they are holding up the 5-star flag. Our reinforcements are here. Brothers, we are saved. More and more people saw the green flood coming from afar. Although they were too far away to see how many people there were, just by looking at the imposing manner and the many flags that were raised, they were afraid that there would be a lot of people coming. In less than 2 days, the 5-star Army's reinforcements had actually appeared. This was indeed out of Wu Gu's expectations. Of course, this was good news. This was the hope for him to bring his brothers out of the encirclement. This was the chance for his Meng Yishe to stand tall in the 5-star Army. With the sudden appearance of the reinforcements, the 8,000 soldiers of the Meng 1st Regiment, who were prepared to die, finally saw a glimmer of hope. It was as though in an instant, everyone was brimming with energy and they could charge into the enemy camp once more. However, when the same thing fell into Harbala's eyes, it made him extremely angry and fearful. This time, the matter of dealing with Meng Yishe was a top secret. The location chosen was also decided by General Mandu La 3 days ago. The news could not have been leaked. Then how did the 5-star Army's reinforcements know about this matter? Could it be that they already knew about this matter and did not make a move for a long time because they were waiting for an opportunity? Now that they felt that the opportunity was ripe, they did not hide anymore and jumped out. Was it to completely destroy them? Or was it that the 5-star Army's legendary communication device that could spread the news over a long distance had taken effect? Was it because they were surrounded that the news was spread? But if that was the case, the reinforcements should not have arrived so quickly. They had investigated beforehand, and the nearest 5-star Army's reinforcements were 400 li away. How could they arrive in such a short time? Chapter 15:19. All kinds of guesses and thoughts filled his mind. His expression changed again and again. He realized that he could no longer grasp the situation of the 5-star Army. It was only when a chilly arch beside him reminded him that his soul returned to normal. General, the 5-star Army's reinforcements are here. They seem to have a lot of flags and a lot of people. What should we do? What should we do? Should we kill them or not? If we kill them, the 5-star Army's reinforcements might arrive before they could completely wipe out the Meng 1st Division. If that happened, would their main force be able to retreat safely? If they didn't fight and retreated now, it would be difficult to explain to General Mandu La Tuesday Harbala was already a guilty general, and if he was punished for both crimes, it was easy to imagine what kind of punishment he would receive. But no matter what the outcome was, it was related to Harbala's life. It was best for him to make the decision. Harbala's expression was conflicted after being reminded by the lieutenant. If we fight, we might be wiped out. If we don't fight, we will definitely be beheaded. But the good thing is that we can guarantee the safety of the army. One was that he might die. The other was that everyone might die. It was a difficult choice. But seeing the 5-star Army's reinforcements getting closer and closer, he didn't have much time to think. In the end, he gritted his teeth and said, "The 5-star Army's reinforcements are coming. We can't fight them head-on. We have to retreat immediately." Perhaps Harbala was a general who cared about the big picture. He knew he couldn't do it, but he didn't do it. Or perhaps he was scared by the 5-star Army. In the end, he gave the order to retreat. He gave up on the attack in front of him and left the 35,000 cavalry behind to cover the retreat of the army. "Commander, the enemy is escaping." A general of the golden armored cavalry saw that Harbala was about to retreat and said anxiously, Wait, is the radio station not ready yet?" This time, Wu Gu didn't act rashly and shouted behind him. When he saw the reinforcements appear, he knew that it must be the work of the radio station that he looked down on. Considering that he had dismantled it after sending the report, he regretted it so much that his intestines were clear. If he had known that this thing had such a use, he would have definitely maintained contact with the outside world. Now, he was anxious to know what had happened outside, and how many reinforcements had arrived. Should he take the initiative to attack, or should he bide his time? The radio operator in charge of communication had studied the system in Chichen City before. He could be considered the only Han Chinese in the entire Ming 1st Military Division. In order to protect him, no matter how cruel the bloody battle was, they didn't let him charge with the army. Instead, they arranged for the golden armored cavalry to protect him. This effort finally paid off. In a short time, the radio operator dug out the radio station hidden in the ground and connected it. Then, he received a telegram from the 5-Star Army's main force. After the content was translated, the radio operator's expression still had a trace of nervousness. He quickly came to General Wu Shugu's side and said anxiously, "Commander, there is a telegram from above. It says that the reinforcements are only 3,000 cavalry. If there is a suitable opportunity, they hope that we can cooperate with them to break out of the encirclement." 3,000. Wu Shugu was shocked when he heard the answer. He then looked in the direction of the reinforcements in disbelief. Indeed, he saw banners fluttering in the wind and shadows everywhere. It didn't seem like 3,000 cavalry at all. However, since the radio station said so, he had no choice but to believe it. He couldn't help but feel relieved that he didn't order the army to charge. Fortunately, he didn't launch an attack. If he took the initiative to fight, the Timur cavalry would have to fight even if they didn't want to. Once they discovered that there were only 3,000 reinforcements, not only would he not be able to escape, even the 3,000 reinforcements would be surrounded and killed. Fortunately, he didn't make a wrong decision rashly. Then, Wu Shugu immediately led the army in the direction of the reinforcements. All the wounded soldiers were tied to the war horses. Although the journey was still bumpy, it was fortunate that they were able to escape. In the past, when they followed the other Kaganates, once they became wounded, they would be abandoned. They wouldn't be allowed to follow the army, let alone treat them. Just from this point alone, who knew how many people were envious of the 5-Star Army's treatment of their soldiers? Among them were their own soldiers, but also their enemies. The reinforcements were the 3rd Legion's Nuzan Cavalry Division. They were personally led by Division Commander Yella. 3,000 cavalrymen brought out all the flags of the 3rd Legion in order to confuse and intimidate the enemy. In terms of horsemanship, the Nuzan Cavalry Division's soldiers were outstanding. Their soldiers could sleep on their horses and travel through the night without getting tired. As long as there were enough war horses, they could create a miracle of speed. After learning that Meng Yishur was surrounded, Yang Qindong immediately thought of this Nuzan Cavalry Division. He then ordered them to quickly provide reinforcements and requested Division Commander Wu Sheng to cooperate fully. As a result, the 3,000 soldiers with the best horsemanship were selected. Each of them brought 4 horses and rushed over through the night with the flags of the entire army. After having a specific target, they didn't disappoint and arrived at the battlefield at the most crucial time. Yang Qindong had to vent his anger no matter what. The commander of the new 3rd Army, Su He, rushed all the way here after receiving the order. He became the first 5-Star Army to arrive at Akamo City and successfully joined forces with the world's #1 cavalry army that had stayed behind to guard the city. These two armies that had been secretly competing with each other and comparing their military exploits all the time finally met. After Tian, Hu, and Su He met, they couldn't help but punch each other's shoulders. This wasn't meant to fight, but rather a different way of showing respect and friendliness. The two strongest armies met. After some discussion, they joined forces and headed south from Akamo City. Their first target was the Kazan Khanate. First, it was to teach the other party a lesson. This Khanate had previously sent 20,000 cavalrymen with Hafertel as its general to cause trouble for the world's first cavalry army. Second, once they occupied or controlled the Kazan Khanate, it would be the same as cutting off the Timur Empire's path to the Eastern Khanates. Then, the Timur Empire would become a lone army, a piece of meat in the five-star army's bowl. They could eat it whenever they wanted. Harbala finally woke up on the way back, but soon after, he returned to Herat City. Here, he met great General Mandaratu and was beheaded in public for the crime of not advancing in fear of the enemy. External enemies and internal troubles allowed the five-star army to achieve so many military exploits and achievements in such a short period of time. Now, the Timur Empire was besieged on all sides. How long could they last? Not only was Khan Amur muttering in his heart, the various nobles of the Khanate also had their own thoughts. It was to the extent that there were people who publicly announced that they would surrender to the five-star army. The civil strife that Khan Amur was most worried about had begun. This was enough to make him vigilant. He sent out a large number of palace guards to keep an eye on those nobles who wanted to surrender, and gave the order to kill them without mercy if things went wrong. Among these palace guards, there was no lack of children from various influential families. They were originally arranged by the Khan's side to show their unity. Now that these guards were used, there was no way the news wouldn't spread. Not long after, the news spread everywhere. This was clearly Khan Amur's intention. He didn't want to kill all of these nobles just because they wanted to surrender, so he gave them an appropriate warning. It had to be said that this move had some effect. At the very least, it suppressed the voices of those who wanted to surrender. On the surface, it looked like the entire Timur Empire was united. The five-star army pressed forward step by step. In order to prevent problems with the supply line at the rear from occurring, they adopted a steady approach. As a result, the time they took to advance became longer and longer. In the blink of an eye, it was already the 11th month of the year 1464. Heavy snow began to fall, completely cutting off the five-star army's path of advance. With the weather like this, it was impossible for humans to resist. Yang Qindong ordered the army to stop advancing and began to consolidate their own territories. While recuperating, they were preparing for another battle in the coming year. At the same time, Yang Qindong also began to have ideas about the Timur Empire. This idea wasn't to use military force to solve everything, but to use literature to control military force. Wasn't Great Khan Amur always worried about the internal problems? Since he was afraid of this, then let's give him this. Yang Qindong sent out a large number of intelligence agents and had them infiltrate Herat, the capital of the Timur Empire. He had them secretly contact those nobles who wanted to surrender. He also pointed out that it would be best to find some nobles who had a good relationship with great General Mandu Latu to persuade them. The reason why the Timur Empire was able to defend for so long, apart from the fact that their territory was too large and that even the five-star army needed a lot of time to enter, was because of this wise and far-sighted great General Mandu Latu. This person was indeed worthy of being a great general of the Timur Empire, a famous general. The guerrilla tactics he used were mainly to harass the supply lines, and whenever he had the chance, he would besiege a small unit of the five-star army's cavalry. His actions had indeed brought a lot of trouble to the army's advance. If such a troublesome person could be dealt with, it would be equivalent to cutting off one of Khan Amur's arms. It would play a crucial role in taking down the Timur Empire in the coming year. This move was equivalent to a black tiger digging out the heart. If it succeeded, it would be extremely beneficial to the five-star army. However, the problem was that Mandu Latu had a very cautious personality. Whether it was assassination or picking out a person's flaws, it wasn't an easy task. Since they couldn't find any flaws in the person himself, then they would start from the people around him. They would make full use of Khan Amor's suspicious personality and make him take the initiative to suspect Mandu Latu. As long as this great Khan really did so, without Mandu Latu's command, the Timur Empire's cavalry would be like a tiger without teeth and would no longer be a threat. At the same time, Yang Qindong ordered the formation of layers of encirclement around the Timur Empire, giving people the impression that as long as the weather permitted, the army would be able to destroy the Timur Empire at any time. In this way, under the pressure from the outside, there would be no need to worry about the enemy not attacking. Those who surrendered would definitely jump out. At that time, even if Mandu Latu was innocent, he would be dragged down. 1464 AD, the year of the destruction of the Khaganate in the historical records. It was precisely under the leadership of Yang Qindong that the five-star army achieved victory in the east and west, causing some small Khaganates and small factions to surrender. Not only did they expand Yang Xie's territory, they also directly dealt with the last threat outside the Ming dynasty. It was not accurate to say that it was the last one, because when Yang Qindong and the Timur Empire were caught in a bitter battle, Bangra, that is Bangladesh, to the west of Burma, suddenly sent troops to invade, resulting in the loss of 4 counties and 3 cities. 120,000 people were captured, and tens of thousands of houses were burned down. When this matter was reported to Yang Qindong, the five-star army nearby had already sent troops to rescue. Not only did the Myanmar army, the Laos army, the Vietnamese army, and the Cambodian army all moved out. Even the Cold Front 1st Regiment that was patrolling nearby quickly rushed over. Although the 1st Regiment, led by Bu Hai, only had 2,000 people, they were a fully armed army, with them as the main force. And with the help of several local military regions, they were able to stop Bangla's army from entering. However, because the number of cavalry in the local army was very small, they could only defend against the enemy's mobile army. Chapter 1521. However, after the Golden Horde, the Rasi Principality, and the Tamerlane Khanate, which was about to be destroyed, became Yang's territory one after another, he had already conquered a large territory in the periphery. Now, it was time for him to settle his internal problems. The southern Ming Empire and Baiming also needed an explanation. In Yang Qindong's opinion, whether it was the southern Ming Empire or Baiming, it was best to settle the problem peacefully. After all, the people living there were all Han people, his own race. Yang Qindong was someone who believed that the Han people were supreme and respected. Naturally, he hoped that there would be more people to share the joy of the Han people standing high above. He didn't intend to use troops. This was also why Yang Xie had been expanding his territory all these years. He tolerated Baiming and the southern Ming Empire a lot. When Baiming broke the agreement several times and caused trouble for them, he only punished them slightly and didn't intend to send troops. However, it wasn't that easy to settle the problem peacefully. The great Ming Empire still had a backbone. If the problem couldn't be solved peacefully, then they would have to use force. Then, he would use the opportunity of dealing with the Bangla Kingdom to make a show of force and see how the southern Ming Empire would react. With a plan in mind, Yang Qindong looked at the information sent by the intelligence department in front of him. Bangla was the Sindhi kingdom of Han. The Eastern Han called it Tianzhu. After that, the central Tianzhu offered tribute to the Liang Empire, while the southern Tianzhu offered tribute to the Wei Empire. The Tang Empire was divided into 5 Tianzhu, also known as the 5 Hindus. Song, Iran was known as Tianzhu. Bangla was known as East India. King Abdul was also a warmonger. Otherwise, he wouldn't have agreed to the request of the king of the three provinces to send troops to the southern Ming Empire to fight against the king of Shiping. However, if they thought that the five-star army would be like the king of Shiping and only passively take a beating, then they were looking down on them too much. For now, he would let them be complacent for a while. After dealing with the Timur Empire in front of him, he would make the other party spit out everything they ate, including interest, inform the Security Bureau and the CIA, and ask them to send people to Bangla. I want to know everything that happened there, the reason for the sudden attack on Myanmar, and who played a role in this matter. I want to know everything. Yang Chindong's face was fierce, and his voice was not loud, but when Beta Persei heard it, he could not help but shudder. He had a feeling that the young master was angry this time. In the city of Turkestan, the old capital of the Kazakh Khanate, Janibek Khan was hiding there with 20,000 of his cavalry. Now that Ili had surrendered, the five-star army's main force on the Eastern Front could smoothly advance. But because the position of the E-Army was relatively far behind, by the time Bai Shuang received the news, the new army had already set off and met up with the main force of the world's first cavalry legion in Akmo City. Then, they moved side by side to surround the Timur Empire. He had once walked out of the world's first cavalry legion and had interacted with the new army many times. Bai Shuang was very familiar with these two armies. It was also because of this familiarity that he knew how difficult it was to snatch food from the tiger's mouth. Instead of racking his brains to think of ways to snatch merit from these two strongest armies, it was better to find a shortcut. Bai Shuang led the E-Army to search for the main force of the Kazakh army. He also invited Wang Yanhong, who was very familiar with the situation of the Kazakh Khanate, to guide them. In the end, their target was the old capital of the Kazakh Khanate, Turkestan City. Logically speaking, even if it was the old capital, as long as Janibek Khan had the slightest bit of intelligence, he wouldn't be hiding there. However, this person was playing the game of darkness and was hiding there. Before, this was only Wang Yanhong's analysis. In his eyes, his Khan was a person who liked to take risks. But now, when he saw the scouts leave the city, his guess became reality. After knowing where the target was hiding, Bai Shuang's eyes flashed with a light of wisdom. He knew that it was time to draw in the net. Right now, it was snowing heavily outside, blocking the road. But because of this, no one would think that they would choose to attack in such bad weather. This was where his advantage lay. As long as the method of surprise attack was correct, even the heavy snow wouldn't be able to stop Janibek Khan from becoming their prisoner or a ghost under their blade. Leave a group of people to continue watching. Everyone else, retreat with me. After Bai Shuang made up his mind, just like when he came, he quietly retreated from outside the city. On the third day, 5,000 five-star army soldiers wearing white cloaks began to approach Turkestan City under the cover of darkness. The one who received the surprise attack mission was Zhuang Cheng, the commander of the Direct Military Guard Regiment, and some soldiers from the 301st Division. The 5,000 white cloaks were also part of the EE Army's stockpile. Under the white snow, the white cloaks were the best concealment items. Unless the moonlight was particularly strong, it would be very difficult to be discovered with one's eyesight. Coincidentally, the night Zhuang Cheng attacked was very dark, and the visibility was only 7 or 8 steps away. When the 5,000 soldiers crept closer to the city, the Kazakh soldiers on the city wall didn't notice them at all. Perhaps in their eyes, on such a cold night with such heavy snow outside, it was impossible for anyone to attack them. This was human nature. Many times, taking things for granted would lead to a big mistake. When Janibek Khan promised to let Bangla attack Yangtze, his fate was already sealed. The night was very cold, about -30 degrees Celsius. Lying in a pile of snow, even though he was wearing a military coat, full of cotton. As long as he didn't move for a while, his body would immediately turn cold. Even so, not a single soldier complained about being tired. Therefore, everyone was holding back, waiting for the moment to erupt, because they would not forget that once this operation was successful, everyone who participated in the battle would have a meritorious service, and that would be a reward of shining silver. And if the meritorious service was too great, in their hometown, the government would beat gongs and beat drums to send food and oil. That was a very glorious thing, and also what every soldier hoped for. Time passed by slowly. Behind Zhuangcheng, Bai Shuang also brought the Yi army's main force of over 30,000 people. Seeing that there was only a vast expanse of white in front of them, Tu Hai, the commander of the 301st Division, couldn't help but ask worriedly, "Commander, do you think Commander Zhuang and the others will be fine? After all, the weather is so cold." "Nothing will happen. We have to believe in our comrades." Bai Shuang's gaze was resolute as he looked forward. After that, he silently said in his heart, "The soldiers must hold on for another hour. When midnight comes, it will be time for them to launch an all-out attack." It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that Bai Shuang and the Yi army's feelings were like a year. However, since things had reached this point, they could only continue to hold on. Even Bai Shuang had to admit that he had underestimated the cold weather. For example, he had only waited for a short while, but his entire body was already stiff. However, the arrow on the bow had to be shot. Chapter 15:22. How much longer until midnight? Bai Shuang had asked this question countless times, and Shaoqing, the commander of the 1st Battalion of the Guard Regiment, had answered it countless times. Finally, when there were less than 3 minutes left, his voice was filled with excitement as he said, "General, there are still 3 minutes left." Good. Pass down the order. All troops get ready to charge." Turning his head to look at the dense crowd behind him, the corners of Bai Shuang's mouth trembled as he spoke. Because of the snow, more than 30,000 people were changed from cavalry to infantry, which made them unable to take advantage of their speed. They would have to rely on their feet to charge, but he believed that even so, victory would definitely belong to them, because they had a strong and firm belief. On the city wall of Turkmenistan, the 5,000 five-star army soldiers began to slowly unfreeze from their frozen state. One by one, the soldiers slowly raised their heads, revealing a determined gaze. After waiting for more than 2 hours, the bone-chilling wind had already penetrated their clothes and entered their bodies. Many people had already suffered from slight frostbite, but everyone was in a good state of mind. Perhaps this was what it meant when there was a great reward. When the time was almost up, with Commander Zhuangcheng taking the lead, everyone slowly raised their heads. Then, the soldiers of the assault team took out their throwing hooks and threw them up the city wall. With the sound of the wind at night, no one even cared about the sound of the triangular anchor stuck on the city wall. Then, the assault team members climbed up one by one like agile monkeys and went straight to the almost undefended city wall of Turkmenistan. It was incorrect to say that there was no defense. Although Janibek Khan didn't want people to know that he was in the city, he still arranged for patrols on the city wall. But because it was midnight and it was freezing outside, no one thought that someone would attack the city at this time. The patrols on the city wall had already huddled up in a shelter from the wind and were sitting together to warm each other. The people on duty at this time weren't very lucky and were full of complaints. They were lazy and didn't need to worry about the officers coming to check on them. After all, in this kind of weather, who wouldn't want to stay in their warm beds and not come out? The direct result of this was that after the commandos ascended the tower, no one could stop them. It was only until a small group of 30 people took advantage of the darkness to sneak down the stairs that they discovered a group of 50 Kazakh soldiers. they were huddled together. Some were sleeping, some were talking, and some were trying to distract themselves. 30 against 50, if it was a direct confrontation. It was obvious that the side with fewer people would be at a disadvantage. In the silent night, the creaking sounds of the city gate opening were especially sharp. What's going on? Why did the city gate open? Who gave the order? This kind of movement finally attracted angry curses and reprimands. Through his studies, Zhuang Cheng, who understood the language of the Kazakh Khanate, knew that his plan had been discovered. He had to hurry up. He didn't care about hiding his identity and shouted, "All soldiers, follow this commander and attack. Kill the enemy and gain merit. Kill the enemy and gain merit." This kind of shout instantly attracted more voices of agreement. Then, the 5,000 soldiers charged forward with high fighting spirit. Due to the cold weather, some of the warriors even fell to the ground while running. That was because their bodies were stiff. However, when they got up and moved their bodies and found that there wasn't much of a problem, they continued to shout and charge. Behind them, when the torches on the city gate were lit, Commander Bai Shuang had led the main force of the foreign army to charge. In comparison, they were afraid of being discovered by the enemy, so they were further away. They also didn't have the help of war horses, so they had to rely on their feet. However, no matter what the conditions were, they had to quickly enter the city. Otherwise, the pressure on the 5,000 vanguard soldiers would increase. No one knew how many of these 5,000 warriors were still able to fight in such bad weather. First, there was the sound of the city gate opening, followed by the sounds of fighting and killing. When the other city guards heard this, they instantly understood what had happened. More and more people began to gather at the city gate. They were also shocked at how the enemy had managed to sneak in and open the city gate in such cold weather. However, no matter what should have happened had already happened. Now, the only thing they had to do was to chase the invaders out. Otherwise, they would all die here. The movement at the city gate quickly spread to Jainurbek Khan's ears. This Kazakh Khan suddenly jumped up from his bed and shouted, "How is this possible? In such heavy snow, war horses can't be used at all. In such cold weather, they have traveled so far. Which army can withstand such cold weather? Also, how did they know that this Khan was in the city? There must be a traitor. Yes, there must be a traitor." Of course, there was a traitor. However, it wasn't someone in the city like Jainurbek Khan thought. It was Wanyan Hong from the Wanyan family, whom he had been suppressing. At this time, it was clearly not wise to be tangled up in this matter. After Jainurbek Khan vented his dissatisfaction by shouting, he also thought of this problem. He immediately ordered, "Send out all the troops in the city. Send them out and chase the enemy out of the city gate. There shouldn't be too many of them. Otherwise, our scouts would have discovered them. As long as we chase them out of the city, they won't be able to do anything to us with the city gate as cover. In such cold weather, they will retreat without attacking. Tell these words to the generals. If they want to survive, they must use all their strength to kill the enemy." Jainurbek Khan's analysis was reasonable. When his words reached the ears of the generals, they also deeply agreed with him. Then, nearly 20,000 troops in the city were mobilized and pressed against the east gate that had been opened. At this moment, there was an intense battle going on at the east gate. It was only because Zhuang Cheng and the others were fast enough that they managed to enter the city before the city gates were forcefully closed. However, in order to defend the city gate, they paid the price. Only 2 of the 30 commandos were left, and both of them were slightly injured. The enemy is not weak. We must not be careless. Seeing that the commandos were almost completely wiped out in a short period of time, Zhuang Cheng felt immense pressure. When he turned around to look at his soldiers, most of them had pale faces and were trembling all over. He knew that the long period of hiding had greatly affected their combat strength. With their current strength, if the enemy counterattacked too fiercely, it was hard to say if they could wait until the main force arrived. Since they had already launched the attack, there was no reason to give up halfway. Zhuang Cheng gritted his teeth and said to the soldiers who were still trembling because of the cold, "Don't be afraid. Everyone, try to move your limbs as much as possible. There will be a great battle soon. We must hold on until the main force arrives. When that time comes, everyone will be heroes. Our families will also benefit from our efforts today." There was nothing the commander could do about it. The only thing he could do was to keep looking outside the city to see where Commander Bai Shuang was leading the army. Speaking of which, the Yi army was composed of all non-humankind young men. They came from different places, had different beliefs, and different habits. Gathering these people together was already a problem. Wanting to tie them together into a rope and organize them into a powerful fighting force was even more difficult. Even though Commander Bai Shuang had put in a lot of effort for this and had basically eliminated the barriers between the different races, their combat strength was still far inferior to the veteran new Third Army and other veteran armies. Compared to the world's first cavalry army, the gap between them was unimaginably huge. Many times, the Yi army would win because they had more people and momentum. They would win because Commander Bai Shuang's command was correct. Once it was a one-on-one battle, their weak side would be exposed, just like what was happening right now. After a quarter of an hour of battle, Zhuang Cheng could feel that there were more casualties on his side. Apart from the fact that they were lying in the cold snow and couldn't use their full strength, it was also because their fighting ability and numbers were inferior. It was also thanks to the East City Gate's terrain that they couldn't place more troops at the same time. Otherwise, it would be difficult for them to hold on for more than a minute. Press on with the reserves. No matter what, we can't abandon the city gate, even if we have to fight to the last man. Zhuang Cheng said with a serious expression. When he said this, he was already prepared to sacrifice himself. He absolutely could not allow the East Gate to be snatched back by the enemy. If that happened, their strategic intentions would be exposed, and it would be very difficult to deal with Janel Khan, who had the city wall to rely on. This was the time for the Yi army to amaze the world. In the cold weather, all the 5-star army were resting, but only the Yi army took the initiative to attack. If they could achieve a great victory, their influence would undoubtedly be even more shocking. The name of the Yi army would also resound throughout the 5-star army. At that time, who would dare to look down on them? In order to kill the enemy and gain merit, for the Yi army, Zhuang Cheng was willing to give up his life. Unless he died, he would never let the enemy regain control of the gate. Quick, faster. Those who can run, run first. Don't worry about the formation. Bai Shuang led more than 30,000 soldiers and ran over from 5 miles away. At this time, even the soldiers with good stamina were panting. If he were to run on flat ground, the distance of only 5 miles was nothing to him. He would be able to rush over with his army in less than a quarter of an hour. Seeing so many of their comrades die in front of them, the remaining 800 people's eyes were red, and the veins on their hands holding their swords were popping out, reflecting their anger. Even if they joined the 5-star army, even if they joined a different army, it was tantamount to tying their fates together. Without a military order, they could only advance and not retreat. This was an iron law. If anyone dared to disobey, not only would they be beheaded, even their family would be implicated. Their family would have to bear the name of a deserter and live a difficult life. Whether it was for their own dignity or for their family, these 800 people couldn't retreat. Either they killed the enemies charging at them, or they were killed by the enemies. There was no third way. Come, fight for yourself, fight for your family. Zhuang Cheng pulled out his sword and said with a murderous look on his face, "Fight, fight for our family." The 800 warriors all shouted in unison and took out their weapons. Under Zhuang Cheng's lead, they charged at the charging Kazakh soldiers. With Zhuang Cheng taking the lead, no one was able to block his sharp saber. Several Kazakh soldiers were cut down and fell to the ground. This scene greatly stimulated the other soldiers, causing their morale to suddenly soar in a short period of time. They forced the Kazakh soldiers to retreat by a distance of nearly 10 feet. As the saying goes, a soldier is strong, while a general is strong. Zhuang Cheng's bravery set an example for the other soldiers, allowing them to display their own potential and make a temporary turnaround. The Kazakh soldiers didn't expect this result. When many of the Kiliarchs saw that the 5-star army was at the end of their rope, they couldn't help but have a fearful expression. As the saying goes, the unreasonable are afraid of the reckless, and the reckless are afraid of those who don't care about their lives. When facing enemies who didn't care about their lives, the fear in their bones would unconsciously jump out. Chapter 1524. There is a large number of 5-star army outside the city. They are getting closer and closer. After both sides stopped fighting for a short moment, a shout suddenly sounded from the city gate tower that had already been recaptured. When this shout entered the ears of the Kiliarchs, they immediately reacted. "Kill them! We cannot allow them to join up with the reinforcements. Immediately recapture the city gate. When the time comes, we will have the advantage of the city wall and will be able to defend the city. Otherwise, all of us will be killed by the 5-star army." A Kazakh Chiliarch loudly shouted, revealing everyone's situation. Under this kind of shout, the Kazakh soldiers who originally wanted to avoid the brunt of the attack were unable to retreat. If they didn't kill all of the 5-star army in front of them, then the next one to die would be them. This was an extremely easy decision to make. If it wasn't you who died, then it was me who died. Of course, everyone would choose to die for their opponent. Under the loud shouts, the Kazakh soldiers suddenly reacted even more fiercely than before. At one point, the 800 warriors, led by Zhuang Cheng, suffered disastrous casualties. In a single round, more than 300 corpses were thrown down. At the same time, they also retreated more than 6 zhang. The eastern city gate was only 5 zhang behind them. If they retreated a bit more, then they might be blasted out of the city gate. If the city gate was closed, then even if they survived, what meaning would there be? Stomping his foot and gritting his teeth, Zhuang Cheng's face revealed a resolute expression as he loudly shouted, "Warriors, behind us is the city gate. We already have no way to retreat. Now, let us spill the last drop of blood in our bodies and stake it all against the enemy. Stake it all." There were less than 500 people left, and there was no longer any fear on their faces. Under the premise that they already knew the result, they were instead afraid that they would leave. Right now, they were only thinking about how many enemies they could kill before they died. Killing one was enough. Killing 2 was a profit. Even if a warrior didn't go to school, they would still calculate the gains and losses. Zhuang Cheng and the others began to unleash the last of their strength. Under the full-force counterattack of nearly 500 men, under Zhuang Cheng's leadership, they didn't retreat a single step. Only when there were less than 100 men left, and almost all of them were injured, did the Kazakh soldiers on the city gate tower begin to shout and release arrows from above their heads. Needless to say, the reinforcements from the 5-star army had arrived. When they heard this voice, Zhuang Cheng and the others seemed to be filled with energy in an instant. The 100 of them unleashed their last bit of potential. One by one, they brandished their swords and charged towards the endless stream of Kazakh soldiers. There were at least 3,000 Kazakh soldiers on the other side, and with the momentum of 100 charging soldiers, they were like a small boat in the middle of a huge wave, drifting unsteadily as if there was a possibility of capsizing at any time. But even so, none of the warriors retreated. Instead, they stood there firmly like stone statues, not moving an inch. Zhuangcheng already had 4 knife wounds, 2 gunshot wounds, and 1 sword wound. At this time, his eyes were already in a trance, and because of his exhaustion and excessive blood loss, he couldn't see clearly what was in front of him. But under his instincts, he continued to brandish his sword, trying to kill as many enemies as possible. Regiment commander, you should step back. As long as you are still here, our guard regiment may be rebuilt. One of the guards of the EE army took the initiative to come to Zhuangcheng's side. Then, with a light push, he pushed Zhuangcheng to the back from the side. The soldier, who already had 2 knife wounds on his body, replaced Zhuangcheng's position. He stood there and tangled with the 3 Kazakh soldiers. Even a good tiger couldn't withstand a pack of wolves. Not to mention, this soldier was already an arrow at the end of its flight. If not for his conviction supporting him, he would have already fallen to the ground. 1 against 3, and with his own injuries, he only managed to slash out twice. He didn't even manage to injure any of the enemies. Then, he felt a huge force colliding with the blade in his hand. Finally, the long blade was knocked away. His entire body was also sent flying after being hit by the blade. The fallen soldier fell beside Zhuangcheng. Looking at the soldier, who had just saved him, Zhuangcheng, who had recovered some of his vision, had tears in his eyes. "Shiguang, how are you? How are you?" Hearing the regiment commander's call, this soldier named Shiguang, who was originally from Laos, slowly opened his eyes. He forced a smile on his face and said, "Regiment commander, I persevered until the end. Can it be considered a meritorious service? Can my family bask in the glory?" "Yes, you have done a meritorious service. The military merits you have accumulated are enough to allow you to leave your registration and enter the Han dynasty. In the future, you will be a Han citizen. Your family will also be proud of you." Zhuangcheng recognized this soldier. When he joined the army, he was very timid. However, after knowing that he could leave his registration and enter the Han dynasty, he seemed to have changed into a different person. He became extremely hardworking. In this battle, he had killed at least 3 enemies and had persevered until the end. Killing 3 people in addition to the military merits before, he indeed had the qualifications to leave his registration and enter the Han dynasty. Zhuangcheng wasn't lying to him when he said those words. Instead, he just wanted him to leave safely. "Is that so? That's great. I have a younger brother who can help me enter the Han dynasty. In the future, when I am no longer around, my family will have to rely on him. Is that okay, regiment commander?" Shiguang's eyes flashed with a glimmer of light. Perhaps that was the final radiance of a dying person. "Yes, as the regiment commander, I promise you." Tears flowed from Zhuangcheng's eyes. At this moment, Zhuangcheng was covered in tears. Thank you, regiment commander." The soldier named Shiguang finally smiled and closed his eyes. However, this closure would become permanent. Looking at the dead warrior, who had just saved him, lying in his arms, Zhuangcheng felt a surge of anger. He didn't know where he got the strength, but he stood up again. He pulled out his sword and slashed at the Kazakh soldiers who were charging at him. 1 slash, 2 slashes, 3 slashes. He did not know how many slashes he had made, nor did he know if he had killed anyone. Zhuangcheng only felt that the sky in front of him was dark. That was the sign of his physical strength being used to the extreme. Just when he was about to fall to the ground, a strong arm suddenly caught him. Following that, Division Commander Tu Hai's loud voice sounded in his ears. "Regiment Commander Zhuang, you have completed the mission very well. Now you are very tired. You should go and rest. Men, is there any medical staff? Immediately save him. This was the voice that Zhuang Cheng heard before he fainted. He did not know whether it was an illusion or reality. After that, he completely closed his eyes. Division Commander Tu Hai had arrived. He brought more than 1,000 soldiers with him. Behind them, more and more soldiers from the other army were entering the city from the east gate. In the eyes of the Kazakh Kiliarchs, they knew that the situation was over, and everything was over. With no hope left, some of them simply abandoned their weapons and knelt on the ground to surrender. There were also some who directly ran towards the other city gates. They did not want to surrender to the 5-star army, so they could only risk charging into the harsh environment where snow was everywhere in order to survive. Janobek Khan did not escape. He had no place to escape. He also did not think that the 5-star army could really enter the city. Just a moment ago, someone had reported that the 5-star army could be driven out of the city. However, in just a short while, the 5-star army actually entered the city. With such a huge contrast, Janobek Khan didn't even have time to prepare before he heard even worse news. The place where he lived, which used to be the Kazakh Imperial Palace, was surrounded by the 5-star army. With a plop, Janobek Khan fell to the ground. He knew that from today onwards, there would no longer be a Khan behind his name. He would become a prisoner. Perhaps he would be killed. Perhaps he would live in a dungeon forever. A sharp scimitar was unknowingly in his hand. Janobek Khan wanted to end his life. He did not want to be a prisoner. He did not want to be treated like a prisoner. However, when the scimitar was placed on his neck several times, he finally put it down powerlessly. He did not have the courage to do so. It was also at this time that Janobek Khan realized that he was a coward. He did not even have the courage to die. At this time, he was in tears. He hated himself for being a coward. Even when countless soldiers from the 5-star army rushed in and dragged him away, his tears still didn't stop. The EE army actually managed to capture the city of Gelkistan when it was snowing heavily and captured the Kazakh Khan Janobek. When the news spread, Amor, who was in Herat city, heard it and was shocked. He knew very well how difficult it was to launch an attack in the snow. The cold weather was likely to reduce the number of soldiers by a quarter or more, not to mention the fact that they had to attack the city in such weather. The news showed that the 5-star army did not use any firearms to capture Turkmenistan city. Doesn't this mean that even in a battle of cold weapons, the 5-star army is quite strong? At this moment, Amor felt that he could not see any hope. Not only did Amor have such thoughts, everyone in the royal city was shocked when they heard the news. Some of the capitulators had their own thoughts. They firmly believed that the 5-star army was invincible and decided to surrender. As for those who supported the war, some of them were unconsciously shaken. Even if they didn't think for themselves, they still had to think for their families. If they still insisted on going to war, and the 5-star army really defeated them and took over the royal city as the pro-war faction, where would they go from here? This kind of thinking also affected great General Manjulatu. Originally, it was just some influential people who sent him messages. Their words were full of the idea of surrender. What 5-star army was invincible was everywhere. But now, even some of the generals under his command began to waver. This made him deeply distressed. He suddenly became worried about this war that he was originally confident in. When he took the initiative to find Amor and told him about his confusion and the situation in the army, he finally got some good news. That is, after the 5-star army went to the rear, there was another force called the Great Ming Dynasty that also attacked the rear of the 5-star army. The damage caused was even greater. Chapter 1525. The chaos in the rear of the 5-star army meant that the Timur Empire's opportunity had arrived, according to Kanamor's plan. As long as they could withstand the first wave of attacks from the Five-Star Army, the other side would be forced to retreat and deal with their internal problems first. Once that happened, they would have a chance to catch their breath. Although placing the hope of survival on someone else wasn't a smart move, it wasn't a smart move. But at this moment, without a better choice, Mandu La too could only think like this. The king of the three provinces was Zhu Huaiqiu. Originally, he had a good relationship with Bangla, and they had worked together to deal with sheeping King Mu's family. Now that they were working together to deal with the Five-Star Army, it wasn't surprising. Even so, when the telegram reached the ears of Yang Qindong, who was waiting for the beginning of spring in the snow, it still aroused his anger. He already knew that Zhu Huaiqiu was a two-faced person and sent troops to guard against him. But after Bangla invaded Burma, Yang Qindong moved the troops to deal with the problem there. He didn't expect Zhu Huaiqiu to make a move at this time. It had to be said that Zhu Huaiqiu grasped the opportunity very well. At least he caught the Five-Star Army off guard. Send a telegram to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and tell them to put pressure on the southern Ming Empire. Zhu Huaiqiu is the king of the three provinces. Now that he's suddenly sent troops, they have the right to control it. Also, send a telegram to the 1st Division of the Cold Front to stop training new recruits and go to Yunnan province. We want to show some people how powerful we are. Yang Qindong said with a deep expression, hearing that the 1st Division of the Cold Front was mobilized. Beta Persei's eyes flashed with surprise. Even if they were all part of the Cold Front, there were differences in strength. For example, the 1st Division of the Cold Front was the most elite of the Cold Front. If entering the Cold Front was a very difficult thing, then entering the 1st Division of the Cold Front was even more difficult. Their test was second only to the Black Cavalry. Because of this, they shouldered the task of training the new Cold Front. Everyone was an instructor, and everyone was the backbone. Even an ordinary soldier could calmly become an outstanding squad leader. This was simply a teaching brigade. One could imagine how powerful such an army would be, coupled with the fact that they were fully equipped with firearms. Their combat prowess was astonishing enough to deter any opponent. Now that the young master had sent this army, it was obvious that he hated Zhu Huaixin. The telegram was transmitted to the headquarters of the army in Crimson City. After receiving the telegram, Lung Song immediately ordered someone to summon the commander of the 1st Division, Tung Shan. In less than half an hour, Tung Shan, who was riding an electric motorcycle, appeared at the headquarters. It had been some time since the engine was successfully developed, and it had been used in many fields. Among them, there were many battery-powered vehicles. When this thing was first born, it truly frightened many people, especially when they saw that this thing did not require manpower to move, and it was not slow at all. Everyone was completely convinced by science. This was especially true for those scholars who had been lured from northern Ming and southern Ming to Crimson City through various channels. They didn't dare to spout nonsense and pick on the flaws in science. On the contrary, many people began to change their subject. They put aside the 4 books and 5 classics and asked about applying to Yangtze Academy. As the commander of the 1st Division of the Cold Front, Tung Shan was definitely one of the oldest people following Yang Qindong. Even though he was only a major general and a division commander, he was still a commander. However, even if he was given the position of commander of a group army, he would not be able to exchange for this position. He was the commander of the 1st Division of the Cold Front, and his existence was equivalent to the leader of a teaching brigade. At least 60% of the soldiers of the Cold Front were indirectly or directly related to him. They were either his students or his students' students. A person with this kind of experience naturally had to own a battery-powered vehicle. When he rode past in a flashy manner, followed by a group of panting guards who were chasing after him on bicycles, there was no need to mention the smugness on his face. Tung Shan came to the office of the deputy commander of the army headquarters, Lang Song. After he knocked on the door and entered, he saluted and sat on the guest chair in the office. He poured himself a cup of hot tea and asked with a smile, "Lang Song, do you have any instructions? Is there a tough battle that you want our division to fight?" When Tung Shan asked this question, he still spoke in a joking tone. He knew very well that on the surface he was a division commander, but in reality he was the leader of the teaching brigade of the Cold Front. From time to time, he would also be the leader of the training brigade of the new corps and even the recruit division. There were too few times when he would be needed on the battlefield, even though he also heard that Myanmar was not peaceful right now, and that Vietnam was also caught in the whirlpool of war. He still did not think that he would be needed. This sentence was more of a joke than anything else. What he did not expect was that Lung Song, who heard this sentence, had a shocked look on his face. "What? You already know about it. What do you mean? What do you mean?" At this moment, Tung Shan suddenly stood up. He felt that he seemed to be right. Could it be that he was really needed in the future? If that was the case, it could not be better. At this moment, he was somewhat unable to suppress his excitement. When Lung Song saw Tung Shan's reaction, he knew that he was overthinking. Tung Shan did not know anything at all. He should have just said it casually. When he thought about how the 6th young master's telegram had been sent directly to him, he laughed and said, "You're in luck, kid. The 6th young master has appointed the 1st Division of the Cold Front. This time, you can show your face properly." When he heard that it was Yang Chendong who had personally appointed the 1st Division of the Cold Front, Tung Shan was so excited that he did not know what to say. Was there finally a place for him to show his skills? When he thought about how he had been placed in the rear for so many years, he had almost forgotten what war was all about. Now that he could finally fight again and display his military prowess, tears flowed uncontrollably from the corners of his eyes. When he saw Tung Shan crying, Lung Song walked out from behind his desk and patted him on the shoulder. "I can understand how you feel. Facts have also proven that the 6th young master has never forgotten about you. Isn't this a chance for you to show off? How about this? The training work will be left to your teaching group. You can lead the other groups. When you go back, make the best use of your time and try to get to the front line as soon as possible. Speaking of which, the 3 provincial kings are very arrogant now. It's time to teach them how to behave." When he heard that the opponent was the 3 provincial kings, Tung Shan wiped the tears from the corners of his eyes and laughed. "Lung Tu, don't worry. This time, watch how the 1st Division of the Cold Front takes care of him. I guarantee that he will be beaten until his parents can't recognize him." Ha ha ha. If it was anyone else who said this, even if it was another division of the Cold Front, Lung Song would not take it seriously. However, when it came from Tung Shan, it was completely different. The 1st Division of the Cold Front wasn't just a simple teaching mission. They were also responsible for ensuring the safety of the Crimson Nest City. In order to better complete the mission, they were good at things like infiltration, assassination, decapitation, reconnaissance, and even naval and air forces. If there was a word to describe them, it would be the special forces of the Cold Front. When an army of tens of thousands of people suddenly appeared on the battlefield and faced people who had only undergone simple training and were holding outdated swords and spears, it would be a bit of a bully. It would not be an exaggeration to say that they would beat Zhu Huihua until his parents could not recognize him. Okay, I believe you. However, don't forget that the training mission cannot be abandoned. If one teaching group is not enough, you can tell me, and I will transfer more people for you." Hearing these confident words, Lung Song knew that this battle was in the bag. The only difference was how big the scale of the battle would be. It's enough. One teaching group is enough. Usually, we only arrange for one regiment to train new recruits. The other regiments are doing all kinds of training. Tung Shan shook his head, indicating that even if the division's main force left, the work left behind would not be slack at all. Tung Shan left at a faster speed than when he came. When he rode the electric scooter back to the division headquarters of the 1st Division of the Cold Front, apart from the teaching group, the other 4 regimental commanders entered the meeting room. When everyone found out that the 1st Division of the Cold Front finally did not have to stay at home and could go out to fight, everyone was extremely excited. If it were not for Tung Shan's constant reminders and warnings, even the table would have been smashed. After a while, everyone finally calmed down. Then, the regimental commander of the 1st Regiment, Chung, who asked in an excited tone, "Sir, when can we set off?" "That's right. All these years, we've been watching our brothers' troops perform meritorious deeds at the front lines while we're the only ones left behind. We can't stand it anymore. If we can set off, the sooner the better." The 2nd Regiment commander, Xiao Shan, also shouted to express his attitude. Seeing how anxious the regimental commanders were, Tung Shan nodded. "Have you heard about the incident with Commander Bai Shuang of the E Army?" "Sir, are you talking about the snowstorm?" "Of course, I've heard about it. Yang Bao has recorded it. The E Army is really good. Under the heavy snow, other people would find it cold to walk around, but he insisted on it. He actually took the initiative to attack and even achieved a complete victory, as expected of the 6th young master's favorite student." The 3rd Regiment commander, Fang Hao, said with an envious and admiring tone. After the 1st Regiment commander and the 2nd Regiment commander heard this, they kept nodding their heads. Obviously, they had the same view on this matter. Only the 4th Regiment commander, Chen Zaiqiang, nodded his head first. Then his eyes suddenly widened as he said, "Wait, does Sir mean that we should also attack in the snowstorm like the E Army?" Chapter 1526. Tung Shan nodded proudly as he looked at Commander Chen Zaiqiang with admiration. "Yes, that's what I was thinking. However, due to the weather, Yuanan province isn't that cold, and there isn't any snow. In fact, it's quite warm right now. Therefore, it's not right to attack in a snowy day, but attacking in winter isn't wrong." "Okay, then let's attack now." The 4 commanders nodded in agreement. To them, it didn't matter what season they attacked in. The most important thing was to attack quickly. They couldn't wait to show off their skills on the battlefield. They also wanted to prove to the other Lung vanguard that 1st Commander Lung wasn't just good at training new recruits, his fighting ability was unparalleled. Everyone reached an agreement, and in the following time, they discussed the battle plan. Since 1st Commander Lung was going to leave the mountain, the bigger the commotion, the better. The more firearms and equipment they brought, the better. Based on the fact that their teacher was Tung Shan, there shouldn't be any problem. This senior was someone who had trained with a few of the Yang family's guards. With this layer of relationship, Yang Wu happened to be in charge of the distribution of firearms in Crimson City. Wouldn't it be easy for him to obtain more bullets? Soon, the news that 1st Commander Lung was going to Yuanan province spread to the upper echelons. A telegram was quickly sent out from an inconspicuous building. In front of Zhu Huiyun's residence, the young man Mo Gui, who had appeared once before, delivered the telegram to him. "Respected King, this time, the one coming to cause trouble for you is the 1st Commander Lung, the trump card of the 5-star army." After showing the contents of the telegram to Zhu Huiyun, Mo Gui took a few steps back and shut his mouth. He was just a messenger, and didn't have the authority to make decisions on many important matters. He only had reminders and suggestions. Even so, he would say what he should say, but He wouldn't say a word about what he shouldn't say. The tall Zhu Huichen took a glance at the telegram. When he looked at Mo Gui, his eyes were full of curiosity. He still didn't know who the master behind Mo Gui was, but his intuition told him that the identity of the mysterious person behind Mo Gui wasn't low. He might even be a powerful person. Otherwise, how could he know the movements of the five-star army so quickly? Out of curiosity, Zhu Huichen sometimes had the idea to capture Mo Gui and torture him to find out who his master was. But in the end, reason prevailed over impulse. Since the other party didn't want to meet him, it meant that it wasn't time yet. He still needed to continue waiting. Otherwise, even if he captured the person, he might not be able to get the answer he wanted. Mr. Mo, thank you for your information. However, wasn't it a little too simple? For example, how many people were there in Lang Yi's division? From which direction they will march to trouble us? If we don't know anything, it's not easy to deal with it. Zhu Huichen said in a dissatisfied tone. Obviously, the other party was using him to go against Yang Qindong. Of course, this was also his intention. Seeing that the Vietnamese province was overflowing with wealth, who knew how many people under his rule would run to Yangtze's territory as long as they had the chance. Moreover, once they ran, they would never come back. For this reason, he didn't know how many people he had killed. However, the warning was still very limited. More or less, people hated the rich. Zhu Huichen had such an idea. He didn't find the reason from his own management. Instead, he unilaterally believed that the land in Yunnan province must be more fertile. Otherwise, how could so many people live there and never come back? After coveting it for a long time, Zhu Huichen had long taken Vietnam province as his own. In his opinion, Yang Qindong's territory was already so big. He didn't care if Yunnan province was less, so it shouldn't be a problem for him to take the opportunity to snatch the territory into his own hands. Once he had this food-producing province as a foundation, he could support more troops and have stronger strength. At that time, when he faced other people, he would have more confidence. This was a typical example of insatiable greed. Zhu Huichen didn't think about it. Why did other people have so many good things, so they must give it to you? He had also fought hard for it, all right? Of course, under greed, people would take the initiative to ignore something. What Zhu Huichen ignored was the strength of the five-star army. Perhaps it was because the five-star army was either attacking the Mongolian army on the grassland near the first city or going to other areas to expand their territory. It had been a long time since they moved in Yunnan province, so Zhu Huichen forgot that this neighbor was not to be trifled with. Or perhaps it was because after Burma was suddenly attacked by Bangla, it was a little difficult to deal with it. It made Zhu Huichen think that the current five-star army was a little weak. At this time, Mr. Mo Gui, who had given him money for free, appeared again. He also brought the opportunity to attack Yangtze's territory and sent 1 million silver taels. For Zhu Huichen, who had military power in 3 provinces and a military strength of as many as 500,000 people, the effect of 1 million silver taels was very limited. But this proved that the other party's attitude was not right. Especially the other party's appearance was very clear about the internal situation of Yangtze. This was what made Zhu Huichen the most tempted. No matter how strong the opponent was, no matter how strong the fortress was, it was easy to be broken from the inside. Chapter 1527. Lang Son. It was the only way to enter Vietnam from the South Ming Empire. Previously, Yang Qindong had set up a shelter here, called the Lang Son Shelter. It was specifically used to take in the Baiming citizens who had escaped from the South Ming Empire. After they were registered, they were given a place to settle down. Gradually, a small market was formed, and there were 1,000 Vietnamese soldiers stationed here. and they were treated as the Lang Sun Army. However, when Zhu Huihua had led his troops south, this place had been taken over and became an important supply route for him. According to Zhu Huihua, Vietnam used to be the Annam province, and the Ming Empire had set up a regime here and managed this place. Now, he was just reclaiming it. As for the fact that this place belonged to the Bugnam of Gojoseon and Yang Qindong, he did not mention a word, as though he had forgotten about it. This was what they meant by having a good reason to attack. This was what it meant to be a bitch, yet still want to build a monument to his chastity. This time, in order to deal a blow to Zhu Huihua's arrogance, Lung Yijun's main target was Lang Sun. The reason why they chose this place was because it was an important supply route. As long as they controlled this place, the wealth that Zhu Huihua had plundered from Vietnam would not be able to be transported back to Guangxi. Secondly, by taking over this place, they would be able to cut off the retreat route of Zhu Huihua's troops. Following this, they could close the door and beat the dog, slowly playing a game of cat and mouse with the enemy. Since this place was so important, the 3 provincial armies would naturally be heavily garrisoned, with a total of 2,000 soldiers. To guard this place of less than 4 li, it could be said that they placed a lot of importance on this place. However, when Lung Yi Regiment's 1st Regiment Commander Chung, who brought a regiment of soldiers here, the fate of these 2,000 soldiers was already decided. Regiment Commander, let our 1st Battalion be the vanguard. The 1st Battalion Commander, Feng Zhan, requested, Regiment Commander, our 2nd Battalion wants to be the vanguard. The 2nd Battalion Commander, Wang Jinlong, stood up and rushed to be the vanguard. Following that, the 3rd Battalion Commander Su Degang, 4th Battalion Commander Hu Jun, and even the security company commander Sun Dewei also stood up, looking as though they wanted to be the vanguard. It was a good thing for the commanders and soldiers to have morale, but it was impossible for all of them to be the vanguard. This gave Commander Chung a headache. In the end, he decided to be fair and said, "Stop King arguing. Battalions 1 to 4 attack from 4 directions. Remember, don't use guns if you don't have to. Don't let anyone escape. This regiment commander will lead the guards to guard the perimeter. You better not let anyone escape from your direction. If it's the battalion that escapes the most, he can keep his mouth shut the next time the vanguard attack. You understand? If Chung, who were to sit down and patiently reason with these fierce generals, it would be very difficult to get through. Facing these people who claimed to be the boss of the world, he had to be even more domineering than them, or even be a bastard. It was common for him to curse. Sometimes the more it was like this, the more they would listen and even be convinced. When they heard Chung, who say that all 4 battalions would be the vanguard, the 4 battalion commanders were immediately happy. They looked at each other, their eyes full of challenge and competition. The 1st Battalion Commander Feng Zhan patted his chest and said, "Rest assured, Commander, our 1st Battalion will not let a single enemy escape. Our 2nd Battalion will too." The 2nd Battalion Commander Wang Jinlong patted his chest, his face full of confidence. Soon, all 4 battalion commanders expressed their opinions. Chung, who saw this, and was happy in his heart, but his mouth was unforgiving. "All right, don't brag in front of me. Whether it's a mule or a horse, let's take it for a walk. If someone escapes from your hands, then this regiment commander will punish them according to the law. At that time, don't be unconvinced. All right, I'll give you 2 hours to prepare. Now, let's start." The 4 battalion commanders each led a direction and quickly left. With only 2 hours, they needed to move the troops to the designated location and formulate a plan of attack. Time was a bit tight. However, to the elite soldiers of the 1st Battalion, this was just child's play. In the past, who knew how many times they had practiced? Although this was not a drill and they were going to kill people on the battlefield, they would not feel any difference. When the training content was implanted in their bones, the difference between a drill and a real battle was only the difference between seeing blood and not seeing blood. However, to the soldiers of the 1st Battalion, although they rarely went to the battlefield, it did not mean that they had never gone to the battlefield before. When Yangxie was still very weak, they had also gone to the battlefield to kill the enemy. Right now, they were just reliving that long-lost feeling. So what was the big deal? 4 battalions, each battalion had 4 companies, a total of 1,600 people. They quickly moved around the outskirts of Langsun, looking for a route to attack. Because of their movements, the sky gradually darkened. The 2 hours that Chung, who had mentioned before, was when the sky turned dark. For the regiment that was used to night training, this was not a problem at all. On the contrary, the soldiers of the 3 provinces who were already surrounded were a different story. As the sky slowly darkened, bonfires were lit all around the barracks of the 3 provinces. From time to time, there would be soldiers patrolling with swords and spears. However, most of the soldiers had already returned to the barracks built by the Lang Sun Army to rest. Vietnam had a tropical climate, with heavy rainfall and high humidity throughout the year. Even at the end of January, the temperature was still minus 20 degrees Celsius. Even at night, it was still more than 10 degrees Celsius. Living here, there was no need to worry about the cold. Even if it was a simple barack, one would not feel cold sleeping in it. In an environment where there was no entertainment at night, as soon as the sky turned dark, most of the soldiers had already eaten dinner and gone to sleep. Only the officers, with their women in their arms, still had to work for a while. As a chiliarch, as well as the garrison general of Langsun, Gung Chun, at this moment, there were 2 naked women waiting for him on his bed. At this moment, he was ready to do something. These 2 women were plundered by him from nearby areas, and they were quite pretty. Originally, their hometown was in Guangxi, but due to the chaos of war, they had reached a point where they could no longer live. After hearing that there was a stable job and a safe environment in the nearby Vietnam province, the family moved here and really lived a peaceful life for a period of time. What they did not expect was for the 3 provinces to suddenly charge in. They plundered their village, brutally killed their village's militia, and robbed their wealth. Even the decent women were taken away and became the playthings of the generals of the 3 provinces. Their beautiful life had just begun, but very quickly it returned to how it was before, causing the 2 women to want to cry, but have no tears. If it was not for the fact that their families were still in the hands of the generals, and if they did not obey, they would have already committed suicide. With their weakness in the hands of others, they could not commit suicide, so they washed their faces with tears all day long. In Gung Chun's eyes, it made him very angry. He could not avoid another round of punches and kicks. Except for their faces, the 2 women were already full of scars. However, even so, they could not escape from Gung Chun's vicious hands at night. When night came, to the 2 women, it was as though they had come to hell. However, they did not know that a new hope was right in front of them, because at this moment, it was time for the 1st Regiment to make their move. After 2 hours, the soldiers of the 4 battalions had all returned to their positions. The battalion commander and a few company commanders sat together and quickly came up with a battle plan. It was worth mentioning that each battalion left a mobile company behind to prevent any enemies from escaping. They remembered the words of their regiment commander, Chung Hu, and did not want to lose the chance to fight again because of an enemy that escaped. When the clock on the military watch pointed at the same time, the 4 battalions of the Cold Vanguard Battalion darted out from the surrounding forest like leopards. Under the cover of the moonlight, their figures were like ghosts as they approached the camp of the 3 provinces. Every soldier was a corps member and had trained new recruits before, and had been a squad leader before. There was even a certain proportion of soldiers, and the proportion was not low. They had all obtained good rankings in the competition. It was not an exaggeration to say that this kind of king's army was like using a cannon to kill a mosquito when facing the 3 provinces that did not have any vigilance. Many of the soldiers of the 3 provinces were recruited as able-bodied men. Being a soldier was not voluntary, and there was no need to talk about serious training. Often, they just relied on brute force to fight. These soldiers did not know what a night battle was, what a sneak attack was, what a close combat battle was, and what a special attack was. When faced with the cold vanguard battalion that was everywhere, they could only passively take a beating. They could not even make a sound. The first to make a move was the soldiers of the 1st Battalion. They set their sights on the patrolling soldiers of the 3 provinces that were guarding the east of them. There were exactly 10 patrolling soldiers, and it was the same number as a squad of the Cold Vanguard Battalion. After Battalion Commander Feng Zhan made a gesture, the 1st Company, 1st Platoon, and 1st Squad moved out. Based on the squad's usual formation, each soldier chose a corresponding position, and each soldier held a short dagger in their hands. After the patrolling soldiers passed by a bonfire and fell into darkness, they made their move. Looking from afar, one figure after another suddenly flew out of the darkness. Next, the figures fell to the ground one after another. Then, there was no movement at all. About 10 seconds later, the figure of the 1st Squad leader appeared from the darkness and made an okay gesture to the outside. Hee, we got them. The rest of the platoons attack immediately and kill those sleeping soldiers of the 3 provinces. Battalion Commander Feng Zhan chuckled and gave out the orders softly. A large number of figures appeared behind him, and each of them moved in an orderly manner towards their target camp. Chapter 1528. This was just a small part of the battlefield. In the other parts of the Langshan camp, the same scene was happening at the same time. One after another, the patrolling soldiers were killed. One after another. The soldiers of the 3 provinces did not even have the chance to struggle before their souls returned to the underworld. In this battle, the 1st Regiment had no intention of taking any prisoners. Although these people were all Han, they had to be prepared to pay the price with their lives. Without taking any prisoners, all the soldiers did not have any misgivings when they took action. They could use whatever skills they had. However, what made them feel regretful was that there were too few opponents. More than 1,600 people were only enough to take care of 2,300 provincial king soldiers. Once a warrior killed more than 2 people, it usually meant that there were warriors who didn't kill anyone. They were not even on the same level. It was not an exaggeration to say that a 25-year-old adult was fighting a 2-year-old child. In less than a quarter of an hour, the 2,300 soldiers were all killed. Only Gung Chun was left in the main room. On the other hand, the 5-star army did not have a single death or injury. There were only a few people who had indignant expressions. It was clear that they had acted too late and did not manage to kill a single enemy. Sometimes war was also about equality. Leaving Gung Chun alive was not to say that no one could kill him, but to leave him for their regiment commander Chung, who, when torches appeared in the camp, Regiment Commander Chung, who walked into the main tent accompanied by the guards. Just now, he had divided a company of guards into 4 groups to prevent any enemies from escaping. They were not afraid of their whereabouts being exposed, but they felt that it was a disgrace to let the enemy escape from their hands when they were already prepared. However, what made Chung Hu gratified was that from the beginning to the end, not a single enemy had escaped. This was enough to prove that the performance of his 4 battalion commanders was perfect. When he walked into the main tent, he looked at Feng Zhan and the other battalion commanders with a look of praise. Regiment commander, All the enemies have been killed without leaving a single one. Right now, only their general is still in the main room. Do you want this subordinate to take care of him for you? Battalion Commander Feng Zhan walked up and smiled in a fawning manner. Scram! He casually kicked Feng Zhan's, but who didn't dodge at all. Then he chuckled and said, "You've all had your fill. It's time for this leader to move his hands and feet." After saying that, Chung, who strode towards the main room. At this moment, he could already see that there were quite a few soldiers standing outside the main building. They had already surrounded the place and clearly pointed out the enemy general's position. In the main room, Geng Chun was still fast asleep. As soon as the sky turned dark, he would do some exercise. Then, he would wake up in the middle of the night. In addition to the normal night patrol, he would also have to do some exercise. This had already become a routine of his life. The soldiers of the cold front moved very lightly, so Geng Chun was not disturbed. It was only when Chung Hu walked into the main room with a few battalion commanders that he suddenly felt something. His right hand instinctively reached under his pillow. There was a dagger there that could be used to injure the enemy in close combat. Get out! When his arm was less than a few inches away from the dagger, he suddenly felt a huge force coming from his arm. Then, Geng Chun felt his entire body fly up and directly hit the paper window of the main tent. His body flew out of the room. Fine clothes for them to wear. Chung, who shook his head as he looked at the two Han women shivering under the blankets. Then, he turned around and walked out with a face full of anger. In the open space outside the main room, the naked Geng Chun was looking around in horror. He looked at the soldiers of the 5-star army, who were looking at him with smiles on their faces. He couldn't imagine how the outside world would become like this when he only took a short nap. Where did his soldiers go? Whether they died or ran away, why wasn't there any sound at all? He didn't feel like he slept very deeply. So why was it like this? Was this a dream? When he thought of this, Geng Chun slapped himself hard on the face. The sound was quite loud and painful. When the pain came, it attracted the laughter of the soldiers around him. This made him realize that this was not a dream, but reality. Do you think a slap can solve your evil deeds? At this time, Chung, who just happened to walk out of the main room, after seeing Geng Chun's actions, especially the naked scene, and thinking of the two Han women that he had taken advantage of, he couldn't help but feel angry. A person who couldn't even take care of his own body, how could he take care of the army? If this person was one of his soldiers, he would have been beheaded long ago. Chung, who strode out and stood in front of Geng Chun with a dark face. Who are you people? Do you know that I am the Chiliarch of the 3-star army? Are you trying to make an enemy of the 3-star army? By doing this, Geng Chun had already exposed everything. At this moment, he didn't care about shame. Instead, he puffed out his chest and put on an aggressive appearance. Obviously, he wanted to gain the initiative by striking first. Make an enemy? You're not worthy. Chung Hu spat. Then, he moved his arm and a short, sharp blade appeared in his hand. Then, the blade flashed and a large wound appeared on Geng Chun's right arm. Ah! Geng Chun's arm was injured and he was bleeding a lot. The pain and the sense of shame made Geng Chun scream involuntarily. Chung, whose face remained indifferent, he took a step forward and waved his sharp blade. As invaders, the moment you made your move, you became the enemy of the 5-star army. Now, you still dare to threaten us with such big words. Swoosh! Another blade slashed down on his left arm. I'll fight you to the death. Both of his arms were injured. If this continued, he would become a bloody man. Geng Chun shouted and rushed forward. He wanted to fight back. In the face of the charging figure, Chung, who advanced instead of retreating. In the process of advancing, He leaned his body to the side and easily dodged the opponent's charge. Just as the two sides crossed each other, the sharp blade fell again. This time, it fell right between Geng Chun's crotch. Immediately, a small piece of meat was thrown into the air and separated from Geng Chun's body. Geng Chun, whose little penis was cut off, couldn't help but scream again. His voice was so miserable that it made everyone's expression change. Chung, who was unmoved. Instead, he continued to stride toward Geng Chun, who was shouting and shouting. As he walked, he said, "Bullying a woman, and a Han woman at that. It's the same as bullying my sisters. You should be punished even more." Another blade flashed, and a foot-long wound appeared on Geng Chun's right leg. Finally, he couldn't run anymore and fell to the ground with a plop. Geng Chun, who had been stabbed 4 times in a row, looked at Chung, who was slowly walking toward him with a frightened expression. He shouted with all his strength, "Don't cut me anymore. Doesn't the 5-star army give preferential treatment to captives? I surrender, I surrender." "Surrender? You're not worthy." After Chung, whose voice fell, he slashed several more times. None of them were fatal. They were all places with thick flesh and blood. Soon, Geng Chun, who had fallen to the ground and curled up into a ball, became a bloody man. His whole body was covered in blood and looked very scary. His body kept shaking for about 2 minutes. Finally, there was no movement. Just like that, the chilly arch of 3 provinces was scared to death by Chung Hu. He was afraid that Chung Hu would attack him again. With this fear in his heart, he died. When he died, his eyes bulged out. This was the most obvious sign of being scared to death. Phew, Chung Hu exhaled. After killing Geng Chun, the depression in his heart dissipated a lot. When he opened his mouth again, he had already regained his composure. Show everyone the consequences of going against the 5-star army. Yes, Feng Zhan and the other battalion commanders were the first to agree. Following that, the other soldiers also agreed. At this moment, they didn't feel the slightest bit of guilt because of the cruel actions of their commander. Since they were going to become the enemy of the 5-star army, then they should have already prepared themselves for this. That night, the moonlight was brighter than usual. It was as if the clouds had parted to reveal the blue sky. On the night of the 1st Regiment's operation in Langsun, the 1st Regiment commander, Tung Shan, also came to Vietnam's Beijiang prefecture and met with the governor, Giang De. Ever since Vietnam was conquered by Yangtze, there were 3 governors. They were Song Je, Luan Shaochen, and the current governor, Giang De. Under the efforts of the 3 provincial governors, the entire Yuanan province could be said to have undergone a great change. The land was reclaimed, the minerals were mined, and various factories and workshops were set up everywhere. The people here were already living a good life with ample food and clothing. After Giang De took over, he had the ambition to make this place even better. In fact, in the past 2 years, when he was developing in this direction, the sudden war disrupted everything. Not only did it cause many of the original plans to be unable to be realized, but it also caused the loss of a lot of territory and a lot of people. As the border between Vietnam and South Ming, Vietnam's military development wasn't considered backward. At the very least, there were 30,000 well-trained Vietnamese soldiers in the entire province. It was because when Myanmar was attacked, they had sent 20,000 soldiers to help. Now that the 3 provinces suddenly attacked, with only 10,000 soldiers, they naturally couldn't handle it. Langsun, Kue Dai, and Langsun fell one after another, forcing them to retreat to Beijiang prefecture. But even there, they didn't dare to guarantee that they could hold on. In the past few days of fighting, they had already lost 6,000 soldiers. Now, there were only 4,000 left in the prefecture. Due to the invasion of the 3 provinces, Zhang had started to recruit soldiers. However, the new recruits had no combat experience, and it was fine to let them fight. Chapter 1529. Without sufficient troops, Zhang De could only send telegrams back to Qiqian City, at the same time going to the front lines to boost morale. During the day, the three provincial armies launched yet another assault, mobilizing a total of 10,000 men. Using the walls of Beijiang City, the Vietnamese army barely managed to hold on, but they also lost over 1,000 men, while another 2,000 were injured. Seeing that there were only 1,000 soldiers left, even though Zhang De was unwilling, he had no choice but to prepare to retreat. Right at this time, Tung Shan arrived, together with the 3rd and 4th platoons of the 1st Regiment. Although there were only 4,000 of them, it was the Cold Vanguard, and it was the legendary Cold Vanguard 1st Regiment. When Governor Zhang De heard the news, he personally went out to welcome them. When he saw Tung Shan, tears immediately rolled down his cheeks. "Commander Tung, you're finally here." A young general beside Zhang De was also curiously sizing up the group of Cold Vanguard warriors in green military uniforms. When he saw the pitch-black muskets on their backs, he couldn't help but reveal an envious expression. However, when he saw that there weren't many of them and heard that there were only about 4,000 of them, he couldn't help but reveal a look of disappointment. This time, the three provincial armies had mobilized a total of 120,000 men. Even if they had suffered some losses along the way, they were still left with 100,000 men. Could these 4,000 men really hold on? He had his doubts. This young general was called Chun Bai, and his father was one of the famous generals of Annan Province, Chin Di. When Yang Qindong reclaimed this place, he had contributed greatly and was appointed as one of the generals of Annan Province. Furthermore, his family was allowed to stay here forever. In the blink of an eye, more than a decade had passed, and Chun Di had grown old. As such, he recommended his son, Chun Bai, to replace him. This time, when the three provincial armies attacked, it was Chun Bai who led the army to defend. Just from the looks of the battle, it was not easy for him to achieve this. After all, to be able to order the organized army to retreat while fighting under a surprise attack, and give the civilians at the rear some time to prepare for the scorched earth clearing work, he could already be considered a suitable young general. "Governor Zhang, you've worked hard. How's the situation now?" After shaking hands with Governor Zhang De, Tung Shan asked with concern. "It's not looking good." "Right, let me introduce you. Chin Di, this is Commander Tung Shan of the Cold Vanguard, 1st Regiment. Commander Tung, this is General Chun Bai, who has been fighting with the three provincial armies. Oh, his father is Chin Di. He is one of the three generals appointed by the 6th Young Master." Hearing that Chun Bai's father was Chin Di, Tung Shan could not help but take a closer look at him. Under normal circumstances, foreign generals were not trusted by Han generals, and this was naturally due to Yang Qindong's influence. He had already said the phrase, "Those who are not of my race must have a different heart," countless times, but all the old people who had been with him for a long time all knew this. However, Chun Bai was Chun Di's son. Chun Di had surrendered to Yang Qindong when Yang Qindong was still very weak. When Yang Qindong occupied Annan at that time, he had made great contributions. So much so that when the Great Migration was carried out, the Chun family was allowed to stay in Yunnan Province. From that point of view, Chun Di's son could still be trusted. Not to mention, Chun Bai performed well in the face of the three provincial armies' attack. With a small number of troops, he managed to block the main force of more than 100,000 soldiers from the three provincial armies. Although he was also forced to retreat, it was not easy for him to do so. "Hello, General Chun." At the thought of this, Tung Shan took the initiative to extend his right hand to Chun Bai. Hello, Commander Tung. I've heard a lot about you." Chun Bai was very excited as he hurriedly wiped his hands with his clothes before shaking hands with Tung Shan. Tung Shan's first impression of Chun Bai was not bad. At the very least, he was not like some Han generals who would not even look at foreign generals. Just based on this point, Chun Bai recognized him as a teacher. After exchanging greetings, they naturally began to talk about the battle in Beijiang Prefecture. Using Governor Zhang De's words, the situation was extremely critical now. If Tung Shan hadn't rushed over, they would have been defeated in the battle tomorrow and lost Beijiang Prefecture. Once Beijiang Prefecture, which was an important transportation route, was taken, they would be able to go to Fuyang or Biandong at will. If that were to happen, they would be in a passive position. After listening to Governor Zhang De's words carefully and seeing that Chun Bai had the same thoughts, Tung Shan smiled and said, "I understand what you two mean. Beijiang Prefecture is an important transportation route. We can't lose it, right?" "Yes." Governor Zhang De nodded solemnly. Once this place was lost, it would affect more prefectures. If that were to happen, Yunnan province would be destroyed. In that case, he would become a sinner. "Okay, I understand. In that case, Beijiang Prefecture will become an impenetrable fortress, and no one will be able to take a step into this place." Tung Shan nodded solemnly before speaking in a heroic manner. Although he had only brought 2 regiments with him for this trip, with a total of about 4,000 people, with the advanced firearms in their hands and the city walls as their support, the 100,000 soldiers from the 3 provinces really couldn't do anything to him. In fact, if it weren't for Yang Qindong's telegram, he would have probably led Leng Yi's division to attack Zhu Huihua's lair directly if they were to stabilize the situation. However, military orders had to be obeyed. Since Yang Qindong had sent him a telegram, he had to execute it. As for the reason behind this, it was not something that a mere teacher like him could ask. If the 6th young master wanted to tell him, he would naturally tell him. Since he didn't, he wouldn't get an answer, even if he asked. Tung Shan's arrival gave Zhang De, Chun Bai, and the rest some reassurance. However, Leng Yi's division only had more than 4,000 people. After all, whether or not they could defeat the attack of the 3 provinces tomorrow would depend on reality. They would wait and see. Some people spent the night in apprehension. On the other hand, the Cold Blade warriors who had just arrived all had a good night's sleep. It was also one of the subjects of their usual training. They would rest when they were supposed to, so as to ensure that they had sufficient energy for the upcoming battle. If a soldier didn't know how to rest, he wouldn't be considered a good soldier. The night passed peacefully. On the morning of the 2nd day, the soldiers of the cold front had just finished their breakfast when they heard the thunderous sound of war drums. When Tung Shan and the others reached the top of the city wall, they could see from afar that the army of the 3 provinces was slowly approaching. From afar, the army of the 3 provinces looked quite imposing. For example, the neat formation, the horizontal and vertical lines, the flags, and the many pitch-black cannons that were slowly advancing were all proof that this was a well-trained army. They've even brought out the cannons. Seems like they're definitely going to take down Beijiang Prefecture. When General Chun Bai saw this scene, there was some shock in his eyes. Although the previous attacks were also intense, the other party didn't bring out the cannons. However, the fact that they brought out the cannons this time was enough to prove their determination. Similarly, in the face of the cannons' attack, Beijiang Prefecture definitely wouldn't be able to defend if it was still in his hands. Even if it was in the hands of the Cold Blade warriors, Chun Bai wasn't confident enough. He couldn't help but look at Commander Tung Shan, who was beside him. If one was suspicious, one had to use them. That was the philosophy that Yang Qindong had used for the generals of foreign races. That was precisely the reason that Yang Qindong wouldn't arrange any cannons for them in ordinary provinces in case something really went wrong and they got hurt. That was also the reason why Chun Bai was so unfamiliar and fearful of cannons. However, when faced with the same problem, Tung Shan and the rest of the Cold Blade warriors weren't unfamiliar with it at all. On the contrary, when they saw the enemy's cannons, they even turned to look at the two commanders behind them and chuckled. That's an 80mm cannon. Its muzzle isn't small. Based on their technology, it shouldn't be an explosive round, but a solid round like the Red Barbarian cannon. There's nothing to be afraid of. Third Leader Fang Hao said with a chuckle. The larger the caliber of the cannon, the more powerful it would be. However, it would also be more troublesome to manufacture. If it was a cannon with a small caliber, they would have to consider if the other party was going to use exploding shells. After all, those things were complicated to manufacture, and they were really powerful. However, with such a large caliber, the chances of them being exploding shells would be extremely slim. Since it wasn't exploding shells, what was there to be afraid of? As long as they could identify the trajectory of the enemy's cannons, experienced people would be able to dodge them easily. Yes, there's nothing to be afraid of. Third Commander, I'll leave these cannons to you. I don't want to see the city wall of Beijiang Prefecture being hit by a cannonball, even if it's a solid shell. You understand? Tung Shan immediately made a request. Yes, Master. Fang Hao was fearless about such a request. He immediately stood at attention and saluted before walking away. That made 4th Commander Chen Zaiqiang, who was at the side, extremely envious. He was still thinking, if I were the one who took on the task just now, would I be the one to destroy the enemy's cannons? Okay, Commander Chen, you don't have to be envious. Immediately send the soldiers of your 4th Regiment to the city tower. After the enemy's cannons are destroyed, they will definitely launch a siege. That will be the time for you to perform. Remember, don't waste any bullets. Understand? Ting Shan obviously could tell what Chen Zaiqiang meant. Hence, he gave the order to the 4th Regiment. Yes, please rest assured, Master. Watch the performance of the 4th Regiment. Chen Zaiqiang chuckled. Putting on a performance was enough to prove his confidence and his recognition of the marksmanship of the soldiers of the 4th Regiment. Chapter 1530. The troops of the 3 provinces did not stop advancing, but because the cannons were too heavy, their speed of advancement was not very fast. They seemed to be trying to scare the Vietnamese army with that formation and instill fear in them. In that case, once the cannons landed, the city of Beijiang Prefecture might collapse on its own. Wang Zhanjiang, the commander of the troops of the 3 provinces, was very proud of that move. He had already asked around and found out that there were only slightly more than 1,000 Vietnamese soldiers in Beijiang Prefecture. In front of his army of 100,000 soldiers, that was not even enough to fill the gaps between his teeth. If it were in the past, he might not even take out something as good as the cannons. After all, it was one of his trump cards that he would only use in times of crisis. However, the king of the 3 provinces, Zhu Huifu, sent someone to inform him that the elite Lung Fong of the 5-star army was about to arrive at the battlefield in Vietnam. That was an army of pure firearms, which made Wang Zhanjiang feel the pressure. He was determined not to wait any longer. Hence, he took out the cannons with the intention of completely conquering Beijiang Prefecture. By then, he would be able to go anywhere. By then, even if the Lung Fong came, they would not be able to do anything to him if they had too few people. With full confidence, the cannons appeared and pressed towards the front of Beijiang Prefecture. At this moment, Fang Hao, the commander of the 3rd Regiment, had also led the regiment's artillery battery up the city tower and began adjusting the cannons. He did not forget Commander Tung Shan's words just now. He did not allow any cannons to land on the city walls of Beijiang Prefecture. In other words, he could not give the enemy a chance to fire the cannons. Even so, he had to speed up. 6 100-millimeter mortars were placed on the city tower. Commander Fong personally took command and tested the first cannonball. Everyone listened to the command and prepared for the first test shot. Target, enemy cannons. High 2, 3, 3, 3 to the north, 2 to the east, 2 to the right, 6 to the right, fire. Boom. A cannonball was fired from the barrel and blasted towards the troops of the 3 provinces that were slowly approaching. After the sound of the cannons, there was the sound of the cannonballs exploding. Under the aftermath of the explosion, when the cannonballs landed in the middle of the army of the 3 provinces, a small piece of empty space was blasted open. Within 30 to 40 feet of the explosion, all the soldiers of the 3 provinces were either killed or injured. A cannonball landed and injured some of the soldiers of the 3 provinces, but it did not hit any of the cannons. Instead, it exploded a few feet behind the cannons. Looking at this scene, Fang Hao muttered, "The goat's horns are a little high. Come on, adjust a little more and get ready to fire." After just one round, Fang Hao already had a good idea of where the cannon would land. When he opened his mouth again, his face was filled with confidence. Target, enemy, artillery. The 6 cannons were positioned 2 or 3 times higher. The north side was positioned 2 or 3 times higher. The north side was positioned 2 or 3 times higher. The direction was positioned 2 or 3 times higher. And the direction was positioned 2 or 3 times higher. 3, 2, 1, fire. After Fang Hao recited a series of professional terms, the 6 cannoneers continuously adjusted the direction of the cannons in their hands. When the number 1 was finished, the 6 cannoneers simultaneously sounded. Then, the 6 cannoneers landed on the ground. The cannoneers flew over the city walls and landed on the soldiers of the 3 provinces. Boom, boom, boom. Boom, boom, boom. After the adjustments, the accuracy of the cannoneers greatly increased. Out of the 6 cannonballs, a total of 4 cannonballs hit the enemy cannons. This attracted the cheers of Governor Zhang De and General Chun on the city walls. What's going on? Commander Fang Hao did not look happy at all. On the contrary, he turned his head and stared fiercely at the 2 cannoneers who did not hit the target. He looked at the 2 cannoneers who lowered their heads and did not speak. It was normal for the cannoneers to have some deviation, not to mention that the enemy cannons were constantly moving. Although the speed was very slow, it was still moving. To be able to hit 4 out of 6 cannoneers was already a very good result. In any cold vanguard division, such a standard was enough to make them proud. However, the problem was that this was the first division of the Lung Feng division. These people were all instructors. Even the 2 cannoneers had taught thousands of students. Now that it was their turn to attack, they actually missed. It was really a terrible feeling. After being reprimanded by Fang Hao, the 2 cannoneers also became ruthless. They first stood up and observed the position of the target. Then, they ordered someone to reload the cannoneers and fired the cannoneers. Fortunately, they finally hit the target this time. The cannoneers landed less than 10 feet away from the cannoneers of the 3 provinces. The powerful shockwave directly destroyed the cannoneers and overturned them on the ground. Cannoneers were fired one after another. The cannoneers of the 3 provinces had one less cannon after another. Within a short period of time, all 30 cannoneers were destroyed. As expected, Commander Tingshan's request was met. Not a single cannoneer was allowed to land on the city walls of Beijiang Prefecture. This result also shocked Zhang De and Chun Bai, who were watching at the side. They did not expect the cannoneers of the 1st Division of the Lung Feng Division to be so powerful. While the first division of the Lungfeng division was impressive, the soldiers of the three provinces suffered. When the commander of the troops, Wang Zhanjiang, saw that the 30 cannoneers that he had sent out had all been destroyed before they could even reach the designated firing position, he was infuriated. Someone order the front troops to launch an attack. Their cannoneers may be powerful, but there's a limit to the number of cannoneers they have. Are they going to blow up all our soldiers? The truth was just as Commander Tangshan had expected. After the cannoneers failed, the soldiers of the three provinces launched a ground attack. After receiving the order, 10,000 soldiers of the three provinces rushed towards Beijiang Prefecture like an avalanche. Good timing. Everyone, listen up. Aim at the target before you fire. Don't embarrass us. Try to eliminate one enemy with one bullet. The 4th Regiment commander, Chun Zaiqiang's yell resounded throughout the entire city tower of Beijiang Prefecture. Afterwards, when the two sides were about 400 to 500 steps away, the soldiers of the Lungfeng division began firing. As the bullets whizzed out of the barrels, the soldiers of the three provinces who were charging at the front fell into a pool of blood one after another. From afar, it looked like they were harvesting chives. They were in a neat and orderly manner. More and more soldiers of the three provinces fell in the path of the charge, making the soldiers behind who were ready to attack look terrified. They were humans of flesh and blood. They wouldn't do such a foolish thing if they still wanted to attack despite knowing that they were going to die. Fortunately, Wang Zhanjiang did not intend to force them. After seeing the amazing marksmanship of the Lungfeng division, he knew that the morale of the soldiers was now in a mess. If they were to attack, they might not succeed even if they had to pay a huge price. Since that was the case, he had no choice but to order the entire army to stop attacking and retreat. It seemed that the attack this time was as loud as thunder, but small as raindrops. The three provinces came and went. On the city tower, Zhangde, Chunbai, and the rest couldn't help but heave a sigh of relief before cheering. They finally believed that even though the number of Lungfeng's soldiers was small, they would have no problem defending Beijiang Prefecture with them around. Tangshan, who had long known everything, watched calmly as the soldiers of the three provinces retreated. He was still thinking that if he were to launch an attack now, he would definitely be able to achieve twice the result with half the effort. Unfortunately, military orders had to be obeyed. His mission was only to defend Beijiang Prefecture, and he couldn't doubt anything else. After Wang Zhanjiang retreated, he even sent someone to report the appearance of Lungfeng to the three provincial kings immediately. Lungfeng's sudden appearance had indeed caught everyone off guard. However, in the letter, Wang Zhanjiang expressed that he would continue to work hard even if he failed this time. He did not mention whether he would be able to withstand Lungfeng's attack. Perhaps he didn't even think about whether the 5-star army, which only had a few thousand soldiers, would dare to attack their 100,000-strong army. That was the outcome that Yang Chendong wanted. It all started with the secret telegram sent by Yao Ingjun. Yao Ingjun, the backbone of the Security Bureau, was also one of the elders. Due to his good looks, he was arranged to stay by Zhu Huiyun's side. He got to know Zhu Lian, the princess of Yongxing County, and won her heart. In the end, Zhu Huiyun rebelled, which also meant that his mission was completed and he could return to the Security Bureau to report. However, he didn't do that, and instead protected Zhu Lian to escape from the clutches of the demons. He then formed an opposing force and started causing trouble behind Zhu Huiyun's back. Although Yao Ingjun left with Zhu Lian, he still arranged for some intelligence personnel to stay by Zhu Huiyun's side. Although they were not important figures, they could still find out some information that outsiders couldn't. Not long ago, the spy sent some information that a Mr. M.O. had become a frequent visitor of the 3 provincial kings' residences. According to their observations, this person should have a certain connection with the higher-ups of Yangtze. For example, Zhu Huiyan found out about Leng Yi's reinforcements in Yunnan province in advance. There was actually such a thing. After Yao Ingjun found out, he naturally didn't dare to be careless. He immediately used the radio to report to the higher-ups. When it was sent to Yang Qindong, he was really shocked. How powerful was the Yang faction? Everyone who was involved in it had a deep feeling. With such a powerful backing, Yang Qindong couldn't figure out who would side with an outsider. He didn't believe that Zhu Huiyan had arranged for someone to enter Yangtze in advance. It wasn't that he looked down on the 3 provincial kings, but this person didn't have such vision. From the information reported by Yao Ingjun, the person who contacted Zhu Huiyan knew a lot of things. This proved that the person's rank wasn't too low. Then, it was a high-level cadre. Who could it be? Yang Qindong felt a chill down his spine when he thought about how there were spies among the senior officers under his command, or people who had done something unfavorable to him. If this tumor wasn't dealt with, then wouldn't he have to sleep with one eye open? Chapter 1531. In addition, if the other party was a high-ranking officer with military authority, didn't that mean that his family in Qiqian City could be in danger at any time? Although Yang Wu had always been responsible for the safety of the royal palace, it was still reassuring. But he couldn't guard against the unsuspecting. Besides, Yang Qindong didn't like being on the defensive all the time. He had to find out the big traitor. And to achieve this goal, he couldn't kill Zhu Huiqiang now. Otherwise, what if the traitor disappeared again when he saw that things were not going well? He wanted to personally meet Zhu Huiyan and see if there was a chance to find this traitor. Yang Qindong even had a feeling that even Zhu Huiyan didn't know who the person who had given him information on Yangtze was. This was the truly frightening part. This was why Yang Qindong had sent a telegram to Tangshan, ordering him not to take the initiative to attack. All he needed to do was defend Beijiang Prefecture and prevent the 5 provinces' army from entering Vietnam to cause trouble. The timely appearance of Beijiang Prefecture's 1st Division, Leng, had thwarted their plan to enter Vietnam. When the telegram was sent to Yang Qindong, he could finally breathe a sigh of relief. Then, his gaze fell on the Timur Empire that was surrounded by enemies. Because of the heavy snow, the 5-star Army's attack had been forced to stop. While they were resting, they had also begun another operation, and that was to cause internal strife in the Timur Empire. After repeated battles, the situation had undergone a fundamental change. Of the 200,000 cavalry of the Timur Empire, 100,000 had been heavily injured, leaving only 150,000. The military strength of the Timur Empire had been severely weakened. The main forces of the 5-star Army had smoothly joined forces, forming a massive encirclement around the enemy, turning it into a beast in a cage. As a result, the people of the Timur Empire were in a state of panic. Other than the Crimean Army and the distant Yusang Army, the other Khaganates had all fallen into the hands of Yangtze. They had no outside help or hope. With these 3 advantages, the people of the Timur Empire were in a state of panic. There were many people who feared death and many who wanted to surrender. Just like when they had dealt with the Golden Horde, the reason they had been able to achieve victory so quickly and easily was largely due to the surrender of Grey and the others. Even when they had destroyed the Ross Duchy, wasn't it because of Peter and the others? In history, wasn't it also because of Wu Sangui's sacrifice that the Qing army had been able to conquer the world? All of this proved one thing. Even the strongest fortress could be easily breached from the inside. Yang Qindong was searching for the Timur Empire's most powerful clans. the Timur Empire's most powerful clans, head of the Timur Empire. Odin Gerald represented the entire shaman family, which was once a glorious existence. The Timur of the Timu, S's when the Great Khan's Great Khan, the Timus the Timur. The Timus, S-A-A-Z-Z, S-A-A-T, in the Timur Empire. The Timur Empire's shaman clan was also the most powerful clan. No one dared to look down on them. Perhaps it was because he was afraid of death, or perhaps it was because he was dissatisfied with being suppressed by the Great Khan. But in any case, the head of the shaman clan, head of the Timur Empire, secretly sent people out of the city to contact the Five-Star Army. They expressed their willingness to help the Five-Star Army get rid of this huge problem. With head of the Timur Empire's cooperation, Yang Qindong immediately abandoned the small and medium clans of the Timur Empire that had contacted him. After all, the destruction of the Timur Empire was certain. It was only a matter of time. Since that was the case, the more people he needed to cooperate with, the greater the price he would have to pay. In that case, it would be better to only contact head of the Timur Empire. Even if there were benefits, it would only benefit one clan. It was better than having more foreign clans benefit from it. The dispatched envoy quickly returned to the city and met with Odin Gerald. He expressed that the Five-Star Army had accepted their good intentions. He also stated that once they took over the entire Timur Empire, the shaman family would receive special protection, and they would even be able to keep 1/10 of their wealth. This was exactly what head of the Timur Empire wanted. Now that the Five-Star Army had agreed, he could do some things with peace of mind. Head of the Timur Empire, was not worried that the Five-Star Army would play tricks on him. Once they did so, the Five-Star Army would find it even more difficult to find people who would cooperate with them in the future. There was no enmity between the two of them, so why must they make things difficult for him? Knowing that the Five-Star Army wouldn't go back on their word, Odin Gerald called over all the clan leaders and explained the Five-Star Army's reply. Previously, the family had held a meeting to discuss the surrender of the Five-Star Army. Back then, it had been unanimously approved. Now that everyone was informed, it was time for them to take action. As expected of one of the greatest nobles, the descendants of the shaman family had already infiltrated all walks of life in the Timur Empire. Even in the army, there were many disciples. Once these people gathered together, the power they could display was very strong. Even Khan Amor had to give them some face. When the entire family was mobilized, the locations of the Timur Empire's hidden troops were quickly exposed and sent to the Five-Star Army. After all, the daily consumption of these troops wasn't small. They wouldn't appear for no reason, so they needed someone to send them supplies. As long as someone sent them, it was equivalent to having a clue. Under careful investigation, some secrets were no longer secrets. After sending the information to the Five-Star Army, Odin Gerald set his sights on Great General Mandu Latu. The reason why the Timur Empire was able to confront the Five-Star Army without falling into a disadvantage was due to the terrain. First, it was due to the complex terrain of the country. There were mountains everywhere. Once the safety of the country wasn't ensured, the army would face the danger of having their retreat cut off. This meant that there wasn't enough supplies to make up for it. This was a very dangerous matter for an army that was marching. The army was scattered and used guerrilla warfare to attack the logistics of the Five-Star Army, as well as some lone troops. This created a lot of pressure for the Five-Star Army. This was also the reason why Yang Qindong didn't move forward. And the instigator of all this was Great General Mandu Latu. Odin Gerald contacted him in order to persuade him. Even if he wasn't used by the Five-Star Army, at least he shouldn't be an enemy of the Five-Star Army. Regarding the arrival of Odungerel Mandu Lado, who was in the mansion, didn't feel any surprise. Judging from his calm face, this seemed to be something he had expected long ago. Speaking of which, who wouldn't know about the filthy matters between the Shaman clan and Kanamor if they were well informed? If it wasn't for the sudden appearance of the 5-star army, Great Kanamor would have been cleaning up the internal strife in the Timur Empire. It could also be said that the arrival of the 5-star army saved the Shaman family and prevented them from being cleaned up so quickly. After all, in the face of an external enemy, a ruler that had to deal with internal strife wasn't a confident ruler, because doing so would only cause pain to those close to him and delight his enemies. Not all of them were as stubborn as Baldi Jiang. It was precisely because he understood this that Mandu Latu didn't think that Odin Gerald's actions were strange. He could see that once Great Kanamor won this battle, the next to deal with Odin Gerald would be Great Kanamor, taking advantage of the chaos. How could they be willing to wait helplessly for death? How could they not do something? In the main hall of his mansion, Mandu Latu received Odin Gerald. In the huge hall, there were only the two of them at this moment. All the servants had been sent out. Looking at the scene in front of him, the smile on Odin Gerald's face didn't diminish. At this time, he didn't know how to describe this great General Mandu Latu, who was strategizing on the battlefield. Receiving him in the main hall and not in the secret room, this showed that the other party had a clear conscience. So even if Great Kanamor knew about this matter, he couldn't directly blame him. He then drove everyone out of the hall, making it no different from a secret room. This allowed Odin Gerald to speak his mind without worry. This kind of behavior took into account the wishes and thoughts of both sides. From this point alone, it was clear that Mancharatl was a smart man, and Odin Gerald liked to deal with smart people. So after he sat down, the first thing he said was, "Great General, have you made your choice?" This was indeed a straightforward question. When Mandu Latu heard it, the other party was stunned for a moment. Obviously, he didn't expect Odin Gerald to be so direct. But the other party asked directly, and he couldn't answer directly. Since he could become a great general who was in charge of hundreds of thousands of troops, he naturally didn't like to be passive, but was very willing to take the initiative. Regarding this question, he didn't answer, but just chuckled and said, "Odin Gerald, you should drink tea first." This tea was obtained from the Han people, and it cost this great general a lot of money. Asking and not answering, Odin Gerald didn't find it strange after hearing it. If the other party gave an answer to his question, then he would find it strange. Smiling, Odin Gerald picked up the teacup in front of him and took a sip. He immediately praised, "Not bad. It is indeed a good tea. The Han people have a long history, and some of their good things are not something we can compare to. If one day we can live with them, drink this kind of tea every day, and taste delicious food, that would be a happy thing. Is Great General right?" Chapter 1532. Soon, the topic changed from drinking tea to the main topic. When Mandu Latu heard this, he couldn't help but admire the other party's quick-wittedness. But he still couldn't answer directly, so he smiled and said, "Are we going to the Han people's place? I'm afraid they won't welcome us." "How do you know without trying? Speaking of which, I have some friendship with the Han people, especially the King Wunan of Damiam. We have already established a connection. Presumably, as a friend, if I make a small request, he will certainly satisfy it." Odin Gerald had a very sincere smile on his face, giving people the feeling that he and Yang Chendong were old friends. In front of a general, talking about the benefits of the enemy's commander-in-chief was already a taboo, but Odin Gerald didn't care at all. Obviously, he had already made up his mind and wasn't going to change it. After hearing these words, Mandu Latu became silent. After probing again and again, Odin Gerald finally pointed out the main topic. At this moment, he had no choice but to express his attitude. It's just that this attitude was really not easy to express. He already knew that the three provincial kings of the southern Ming Empire and Banj Empire were acting separately. Now, the five-star army's backyard should be on fire. At this moment, it's not the time to make a final decision. If the five-star army couldn't withstand this pressure and withdrew back to their country to quell the chaos, then the danger of the Timur Empire would be eliminated. Then, Great Khan Amur would be victorious. At this time, standing on Odungeral's side, wouldn't it be suicidal? Mandu Latu had his own worries and thoughts, so he didn't answer this question immediately. In this regard, Odin Gerald, who saw everything in his eyes, wasn't surprised. On the contrary, he was a little happy. He was most afraid of the other party's rejection. If that's the case, then whatever he wants to say will be useless. It's not impossible for the other party to directly capture him and send him to the Great Khan. Although he had already made this decision on the way here, he still didn't want the worst result to happen, because it means that whether the Great Khan Amur wins or loses in the end, he will be a loser. Therefore, what he wanted was for the other party to remain silent. Only then would he have the opportunity to speak more of his thoughts. General, I know what you're hesitating about. I also know what you're worried about. However, I don't know if you've thought about it, but the Timur Empire's current state is not due to Amur's contributions alone, nor is it due to his father, Abu Said Mirza's contributions. Instead, it is the result of everyone's efforts. But now, he thinks that his position is stable, so he wants to get rid of those who disagree with him. If he wants to monopolize everything, will others allow it? Today, they made an example out of our shaman clan. Once they succeed and get the benefits, they might make an example out of someone else. For example, Great General, if you can defeat the five-star army this time, then your contribution will be so great that I'm afraid it will cause some people to be vigilant. The Han people have a saying, great contributions shake the Lord, and there is another saying, after the birds have flown, the bow is put away. When that time comes, do you think you will still be valued and not be suspected? Speaking up to here, Odungerel couldn't help but sneer. I'm afraid that when that time comes, the fate of our shaman clan will be a lesson to you, Great General. At this moment, Mandu Latu's face finally trembled. To be honest, it wasn't that he didn't consider this problem, but he thought that with the shaman clan in front of him, the Great Khan would definitely not make a move on him. But what Odungerel said was right. Once the shaman clan was dealt with, what would happen? He would become the one who stood out, and with a more suspicious nature. Even if he lost his military power, it would be difficult for him to have a good ending. This was the saying, accompanying a ruler is like accompanying a tiger. This was the sorrow of a capable minister. If a capable minister met a good master, then perhaps it would be better. But once they met a master with a strong jealousy, the end result was predictable. History also proved that a capable minister didn't have a good ending. Mandu Latu's face changed. This was a good change. In Odungerel's eyes, he was confident, but he still felt that it wasn't enough, so he continued. At least the Great General is worried about whether the five-star army will withdraw or not. This is actually not a problem. A Han army that even destroyed the Golden Horde, how could it easily submit to a small Bangra and the southern Ming king? Even if he has no choice but to retreat for the time being, look at our surroundings. The previous Khanates no longer exist. Only the Khanate of Crimea is left. Once the five-star army takes care of their own backyard, how are we going to face them? Yes, the Khanate. At that time, will there still be people who will find trouble with the five-star army and attract their attention? Great General, don't you think How unreliable is it to entrust the hope of survival to others? This shouldn't be your style, right? Even Odungerel said this. At this moment, Mandu Latu didn't know what to say. At this moment, he had to admit that Odungerel was indeed a good diplomat. In the face of such a person, he had already lost a round in terms of language. Okay, but I don't know what kind of agreement you have with the King Wunan of Damyang. What can I do? What can I get in return? Finally, Mandu Latu lowered his head. Not for anything else. Even if he wasn't afraid of death, he still had to consider the safety of his family and dozens of people. He could die on the battlefield, but that was under the premise that the Great Khan guaranteed the safety of his family. If he died, and his family also died, then he would be the greatest sinner, and he would die with everlasting regret. Ha ha ha! Odungerel finally laughed. He knew that the matter was settled. His nemesis, Amor, would not live for long. He was about to win, although this victory was at the cost of his country. But for him, if he didn't borrow the power of the 5-star army, the one who would die in the end would be him. If he didn't even have his life, what country would he talk about? What nation would he talk about? It was a day later that Yang Chindong got the news. When he saw the messenger sent by Odungerel saying that Mandu Latu would also surrender, but please give him the same treatment as the shaman family, he agreed without hesitation. Even Yang Chindong had to admit that this Mandu Latu was a difficult opponent. The guerrilla warfare he used, combined with the terrain, really gave him a headache. But if he could just spare this person's life in exchange for victory, of course, he wouldn't object. If the other party was willing, he would even put him in an important position. But this was just an idea. Mandu Latu was different from Odungerel. The latter really hated Amor, so much so that he hated the entire Timur Empire. Mandu Latu was different. He had no choice but to surrender for the safety of his family and the general situation. Such a person still had a national complex. So even if you used him, what could he do if he didn't put in any effort? Let's not think about this first. At least Mandu Latu was on his side. Yang Chindong was now ready for everything except for the east wind. This east wind was the time when the ice and snow would melt. March 1465 AD. The heavy snow that hadn't been seen in 100 years finally began to melt. The 5-star army that surrounded the Timur Empire also began to move. They began to march forward in several different directions. Amor, who received the news, was shocked, but he didn't panic. He immediately sent someone to inform Mandu Latu and let him move the arranged ambushes to disrupt the 5-star army's line of sight, cut off the enemy's logistical supplies, and delay the enemy's advance. As long as the time passed, the 5-star army would have the possibility of retreating. Although the city was very lively this winter, due to the current tense situation, many people jumped out to surrender. But Amur had never doubted his great general, Mandu Latu. He understood the other party. This was a smart person. In addition, he knew that the shaman family was his current enemy. As long as the situation wasn't so bad that it couldn't be saved, he could use this person without worry. If one were to say that Amur was indeed suspicious, then which monarch wouldn't be? Even Yang Chindong was suspicious of people and had to use them. But it also depended on the person. For example, Mandu Latu, he did not have too many doubts. Although he knew that many people had gone to him during this period, the informants he sent told him that the Supreme General had not made any move to deploy troops. This made him completely relieved. What he didn't know was that he didn't need Mandu Latu's order to move the troops. He only needed to tell Odungerel where the troops were hidden and let him pass on the information to the 5-star army. Just like when Great Khan Amor gave the order to Mandu Latu to start guerrilla warfare, the 5-star army was also encircling and annihilating the Timur Empire's army that was hiding in various places and didn't know that their positions had been exposed. With the 1st Cavalry Division of the World's Cavalry Division and the 1st Cavalry Division, as long as they had a clear target, they could appear as fast as they could without the obstruction of the heavy snow. Then they would charge, and there was no more after that. Unless they had firearms, no one would be a match for these two powerful cavalry units. Over the years, the soldiers of the two armies had become accustomed to living on horses. They could easily sleep, eat, and kill enemies on horseback. After countless battles, they had rich combat experience. They knew what kind of battle formation to face the enemy and how to find the enemy's weak point in the shortest time to attack. It was as if these things had fused with their lives. This was all thanks to the large and small battles they had experienced. As the saying goes, a long illness makes a doctor. Now, the strength of the two armies was so strong that they were invincible. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that even if Genghis Khan was alive, his most elite cavalry might not be a match for these two armies. Chapter 1533. With such powerful fighting strength, the outcome of the battle was easy to imagine. Even if they took into account the time they spent on the long journey, it only took a month for the Timur Empire's army of 100,000 to be completely wiped out. Those who didn't die were captured. Due to the lack of information, Amur didn't know about this matter. Even Mandaratl, who had betrayed the army, didn't know that the battle would end so quickly. As the good news came in one after another, the 5-star army's main force finally didn't have to worry about anything and could attack Herat without any worries. After a month and a half, the first 5-star army suddenly arrived at the capital. When Khan Amur heard the news, his expression changed greatly, and he shouted that it was impossible. He didn't believe that the 5-star army would take the risk to appear outside the capital before the problem with the supply route was solved. Didn't they know that if they couldn't successfully take down the capital, they would become an isolated army? Wasn't that very dangerous? With all kinds of disbelief, Amur climbed up the city gate tower and saw an unbelievable scene. He saw more and more 5-star banners appearing in all directions. Not only that, he also saw many carriages and mules carrying supplies rushing to the enemy camp outside the city. From afar, he could see that there weren't many enemy soldiers escorting the supplies. In other words, they didn't suffer any attacks or harassment during the process. What's going on? What's going on? After a series of shouts, Amur ordered someone to summon Mandaratl. He wanted to ask his great general. Regretfully, he sent people out, but when they reached the great general's residence, it was already empty. Mandaratl had actually disappeared into thin air. After hearing the news, Amur's face was incomparably pale. At this time, even if he reacted slowly, he knew that this great general must have betrayed him and exposed the location of the troops outside to the 5-star army. This allowed the enemy to appear so smoothly in front of him without any worries. The reason why the Timur Empire was able to hold on for so long wasn't because of how powerful their cavalry was or how powerful they were. To put it bluntly, they were using the terrain to cut off the 5-star army's supply route. Although Rezin City had prepared a lot of military rations like instant noodles, compressed biscuits, ham sausages, and canned meat, however, there was still a limit to their numbers. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers were expending a huge amount every day. Therefore, the food that was convenient and could fill their stomachs was basically given to the main forces of the 5-star army. The surrendered Russian and Mongolian divisions did not receive such treatment. In the end, they still had to rely on normal rations to maintain their daily needs. If that wasn't the case, they wouldn't have to spend so much effort to attack the Timur Empire. And now, after the only drawback was taken care of by the 5-star army, They could finally appear in front of Khan Amor without any worries. Having figured everything out, Amu-Ur's face turned red with anger. Search. Even if we have to turn the entire city upside down, we have to find Mandu Latu for this Khan. We have to tear him into pieces. Tear him into pieces. Yes. Seeing that the Khan was enraged, his subordinates didn't dare to dissuade him and quickly agreed. Then, the 50,000 cavalrymen in the city began to move. They searched every possible corner of the great general's whereabouts, but unfortunately, they still couldn't find any traces of him. When the situation was reported to Khan Amor, someone suggested, "Great Khan, there are still some nobles' houses that haven't been searched yet. For example, Odin Gerald and the others. Enough. The enemy is before us. Let's deal with the current situation first." Khan Amor raised his right hand and waved it gently. Now was the time to unite against the enemy. There was no need to make the city restless. Although he didn't like Odin Gerald and the others, they weren't weak. The people who were related to them could be said to be deeply rooted. If they were to search his house at this time, it would only cause panic. Khan Amor believed that he still cared about the overall situation. However, what he didn't know was that Mandu Ratu was currently hiding in Odin Gerald's house and drinking with him. What he didn't know was that Odin Gerald's hatred for him had reached the point where he would rather see the entire Timur Empire be destroyed than to teach Amor a lesson. It could be said that this kind of hatred had been engraved into his bones. It was greater than the sky. Odin Gerald's mansion was already filled with many mansion soldiers. They were the armed forces of the shaman family. Usually, they were hidden and not known by others. However, now that they had reached a critical juncture, they were gathered in the mansion. Their purpose was to prevent Amor from acting recklessly and attacking them before he died. This way, they would have a certain degree of resistance. Actually, it wasn't only Odin Gerald's mansion. The houses of the nobles in the vicinity were also like this. They either activated their hidden forces or spent a large amount of money to hire many guards. In short, they all possessed a certain degree of defensive power. In order to save their lives, they also agreed that once Amor lost his mind and wanted to attack them, they would send reinforcements from all sides. Only in this way could they ensure their own safety. "Come, great general, please drink." Although the city outside was surrounded, there was no panic on Odin Gerald's face at this moment. On the contrary, he was still as calm as water. "Sigh, I'm no longer a great general. There's no need to call me that in the future. I'm just an ordinary person." Mandu Ratu had a cautious look on his face. Obviously, the whole city was searching for him now. It was impossible to say that he wasn't flustered at all. He good. Odin Gerald didn't intend to force him. He poured wine for both sides with a smile on his face, then asked, "Brother Ratu, do you think he will act recklessly?" It shouldn't be. The 5-star army is outside the city. He can't even deal with them. How can he come to find trouble with us?" Knowing what the other party wanted to hear, Mandu Ratu said according to his thoughts. "That's true." Hearing this, Odin Gerald nodded in agreement. He reached out his hand to take the wine glass, but before he put the wine to his lips, he asked again, "Brother Ratu, he won't go crazy, right? You should know that a crazy person can do anything." "No, our great Khan is very wise. He won't go crazy easily," Mandu Ratu said again, with certainty. Finally, Odin Gerald didn't stop asking. Instead, he lightly nodded and said with a smile, Good. Come, let's continue drinking." Mandu Ratu's guess was right. Perhaps he understood their great Khan well enough. Amor was indeed not a crazy person. Until now, he was still very rational. Even when he saw the cannons of the 5-star army appearing outside the city from the top of the city tower, he didn't have the intention to kill people in the city. Instead, he called the captain of the guards and gave him an order. He knew that he couldn't defeat the five-star army. Now that he was surrounded, the only way was to escape. The reason why he didn't make a move on the nobles in the city was because he couldn't spare any energy compared to killing others. His own life was more important. The 50,000 cavalrymen in the city were all recruited by him. Among them, the high-ranking officers were all appointed by him. They only listened to him. This was also the reason why Mandu Ratu hid, even though he was a great general. He couldn't command these 50,000 cavalrymen at all. This was Amur's final trump card. Now, he had to use this trump card to escape. He firmly believed in a phrase that the Han people often said, "Where there's life, there's hope." Although he didn't know if he could escape this time, and if there was a possibility of Dongshan rising again after escaping, he had to try. Otherwise, if he stayed in the city, even if the King Wunan of Daemyang didn't kill him, he was no different from being dead. The five-star army was still surrounding Herat. Because there were many mountains and lakes, and the terrain was complicated, many routes that seemed to be close had to be taken around. This greatly slowed down the assembly of the army. According to the reported itinerary of the various troops, it would take another 5 to 7 days to complete the encirclement. Before the encirclement was complete, Yang Qindong didn't prepare to launch an attack. He wanted to finish it in one strike. Seeing that Herat was going to be his, he wanted to reduce the losses as much as possible. This was also beneficial for the post-war reconstruction. Therefore, whether it was the Air Force or the cannons, they weren't arranged to be deployed immediately. The five-star army didn't have any plans to make a move, but an accident happened. That night, the 4 gates of Herat city opened wide. Following that, an endless stream of cavalrymen began to charge out. At first, Yang Qindong thought that the enemy was testing the waters. However, as more and more cavalrymen charged out of the city, he and the other generals finally realized that this wasn't a test. They were clearly trying to break out of the encirclement. Break out of the encirclement. It seems that this Amur still cherishes his life. Yang Qindong, who had heard the news, looked at the sand table in front of him in the main tent. "Young master, we don't have enough troops and aren't prepared enough. I'm afraid we can't kill all of the enemy cavalry." Beta Persei had already put on a suit of armor and appeared in front of Yang Qindong. Although he said that they couldn't, his restless appearance proved that he wanted to attack and beat the enemy while they were down. "Yes, our encirclement hasn't been fully launched yet. I have to say that this Amur chose the right time." "Haha, forget it. The entire Timur Empire is gone. Even if this great Khan escapes, what can he do?" Yang Qindong quickly adjusted his attitude. In history, he had never heard of this Amur's name, completely unlike Ivan, who had a resounding reputation. Even so, this person's strength must be ordinary. If that was the case, then so be it. If he wanted to escape, then so be it. As long as he dares to continue to be the enemy of the five-star army, then one day he will be discovered and beheaded on horseback. Thank you to 3-inch Flame for your monthly votes for munitions. Lungzi thanks you. Munitions will be finished next month. I guarantee that it will be finished at least 3 to 4 chapters a day. Please read it without worry. The new book Duke Ferocious will be officially published on the novel website today. Everyone is welcome to read it. At the same time, please bookmark, recommend, and click the new book. Your support is the greatest encouragement to the prodigal son. You're tuning in to the Mystic Fist YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.